The whip cracked against Hannah Price's bare back for the 100th time, each lash a proclamation of her supposed sin barrenness. Blood pooled beneath her knees as the townspeople of Cedar Ridge watched, some with pity, most with righteous satisfaction. "Let this be a lesson," the mayor bellowed, "to any woman who fails in her sacred duty." But fate had other plans. A war-scarred farmer named Daniel Reed would soon carry her broken body from that riverside, forever changing both their destinies. Stay with me, friends, and comment your city below. Let's see how far this story of redemption travels. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Kansas prairie as Hannah Price struggled to consciousness, her back a canvas of agony painted in blood and torn flesh. The rough wooden floor beneath her cheeks smelled of pine and lye soap, unfamiliar scents that told her she was no longer dying by the river where they'd left her. Every breath sent fire racing across her wounds, but she was alive, though she couldn't fathom why anyone would want her to be. "Papa, she's awake." A young voice, high and sweet, pierced through the fog of pain. Hannah tried to lift her head, but the movement sent the room spinning. Gentle hands pressed her shoulders down, and she found herself looking into the weathered face of a man whose eyes held both steel and kindness, a contradiction she'd never seen in any man before. "Easy now," Daniel Reed said, his voice rough as prairie wind. "You've been through hell. No need to rush back to the living." "Where?" Hannah's voice came out as a croak. Her throat felt like she'd swallowed sand and thorns. "You're in my home. Name's Daniel Reed. These are my daughters Mary, she's 12, and little Sarah just turned 8. He gestured to two girls hovering in the doorway, their faces etched with concern far beyond their years. "My boy Thomas is out tending the animals. He's 14, thinks he's already a man." Hannah's eyes darted between them, confusion mixing with fear. "Why?" Daniel understood the question without elaboration. "Because leaving you there to die would have made me no better than the bastards who did this to you." His jaw clenched, and she saw his hands tighten into fists. "Pardon my language, girls. We've heard worse." "Papa," Mary said, stepping closer with a bowl of water and clean cloths. "Mrs. Henderson taught us how to tend wounds. May I?" Hannah nodded weakly, though every instinct screamed at her to flee. She'd learned that kindness always came with a price, especially from men. Her former husband, had taught her that lesson well. As Mary's gentle hands began cleaning the edges of her wounds, Hannah bit down on her lip to keep from crying out. The girl worked with surprising skill, her touch lighter than butterfly wings. "I saw what they did," Sarah whispered, her young voice trembling. "The whole town watching while Mr. Morrison, while he..." She couldn't finish, tears streaming down her freckled cheeks. "Sarah, go help your brother with the chickens," Daniel said firmly, but not unkindly. "But Papa..." "Go on now." The little girl reluctantly left, casting one more sympathetic glance at Hannah before disappearing through the door. Daniel pulled up a wooden stool, sitting at a respectful distance. "I know you don't know me from Adam, and you've got no reason to trust a word I say, but you're safe here. Nobody's laying another hand on you while you're under my roof." "They'll come for me," Hannah whispered. "They always do. I'm cursed, barren, worthless." "Stop!" The single word carried such authority that Hannah's mouth snapped shut. "I don't care what they say you are. In this house, you're a human being deserving of dignity and respect. Nothing more needs saying on that count." Mary continued her ministrations in silence for several minutes before speaking. "Papa found you 3 days ago. You were burning with fever. We weren't sure you'd make it." 3 days. Hannah had lost 3 days to darkness and pain. "Your mother died 2 years back," Mary said quietly. "Consumption took her. We've been managing on our own since then." Hannah studied the girl more carefully now, noting the premature maturity in her eyes, the way she moved with practiced efficiency. This child had been forced to grow up too fast to fill shoes too big for her young feet. "I'm sorry," Hannah whispered. "Don't be. Mama wouldn't want pity. She'd want us to keep living, keep helping folks when we can." Mary wrung out the cloth, now pink with diluted blood. "That's what Papa says anyway." Daniel stood abruptly. "I'll leave you ladies to it. Marry the laudanum's in the medicine chest if she needs it for the pain. Don't be stingy with it. God knows she's earned some relief. He paused at the doorway, his broad frame filling it completely. Mrs. Price. Just Hannah, she interrupted. I'm no longer anyone's wife. Something flickered in his eyes, anger perhaps, though not directed at her. Hannah, then. You're welcome here as long as you need. When you're healed enough, if you want to leave, I'll take you wherever you want to go. But until then, you're under my protection. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me and my rifle. After he left, Mary continued tending to her wounds with careful precision. Papa means it, you know, about protecting you. He came back from the war different, quieter, sadder, but also fiercer about defending folks who can't defend themselves. The war? Hannah asked, though talking hurt. He was at Antietam. Shiloh, too. Doesn't talk about it much, but sometimes at night. Mary trailed off, shaking her head. Sometimes we hear him crying out in his sleep. Mama used to be able to calm him, but now we just let him be. He always comes around by morning. Hannah absorbed this information, piecing together a picture of the man who'd saved her. A warrior haunted by ghosts, raising 3 children alone, yet still finding enough compassion to rescue a worthless woman from the riverside. I shouldn't be here, Hannah said. I'll bring trouble to your door. Mary's hand stilled. You think we don't already have trouble? You think folks don't whisper about us too? A man raising children alone, no woman to keep house proper. They talk about Papa like he's either a saint or a sinner, can't decide which. At least with you here, maybe they'll have something new to gossip about. Despite everything, Hannah felt her lips twitch toward what might have been a smile if she remembered how. This girl had spirit aflame that hadn't been extinguished by loss and hardship. The door burst open and a tall, lanky boy entered, his clothes dusty from farm work. This had to be Thomas. He took one look at Hannah and his expression hardened. You're awake then, he said flatly. Thomas, Mary warned. What I'm not saying, nothing wrong, just observing. He grabbed a piece of cornbread from the table, shoving it in his mouth. Papa says you're staying. That true? Your father offered. Yeah, he does that. Offers help to every stray that comes along. Last time it was that drunk veteran Pete Williams. Stayed 2 months, ate us near out of house and home before moving on. Thomas Reed. Mary's voice cracked like a whip. You apologize right now for what speaking truth? But under his sister's glare, he deflated slightly. Sorry, ma'am. We've got enough troubles without borrowing more. Hannah understood his resentment. She was another mouth to feed, another burden for a family already struggling. You're right, she said quietly. I'll leave as soon as I can stand. Thomas had the grace to look ashamed. I didn't mean... Yes, you did, and you're not wrong. Hannah tried to sit up, gasping as the movement pulled at her wounds. I've brought nothing but trouble to everyone I've ever known. That's enough of that talk. Daniel's voice boomed from the doorway. None of them had heard him return. Thomas, you and I need to have a conversation about hospitality and Christian charity. But Papa, now! Thomas slunk out, shooting one more glance at Hannah, less hostile, now more curious. Daniel lingered for a moment. Boy's got his mother's protective streak. Sees a threat to his family and bristles up like a porcupine. Don't take it personal. He's right to be wary, Hannah said. The town. They won't take kindly to you harboring me. Let me worry about the town. Daniel's expression darkened. I've faced down Confederate cavalry charges. I reckon I can handle a few small-minded townsfolk. Over the next days, Hannah slowly began to heal. Her back would always bear the scars, 100 lines of raised tissue that told the story of her shame, but the wounds closed, the fever broke, and strength returned to her limbs in small increments. The Reed household settled into an unusual rhythm around her presence. Mary continued as her primary caretaker, changing bandages and bringing meals. Sarah, overcome her initial shyness, would sit by Hannah's bedside and chatter about everything and nothing. The new calf in the barn, the way the clouds looked like dancing rabbits. How Mrs. Henderson's son Samuel had put a frog in the teacher's desk drawer. Thomas remained distant but no longer hostile. Sometimes Hannah caught him watching her with a puzzled expression, as if trying to solve a particularly complex arithmetic problem. And Daniel was a constant but distant presence. He checked on her morning and evening, always proper, always respectful. He brought her books from his small collection, worn copies of Shakespeare Pilgrim's Progress, and surprisingly, Jane Austen. "Belonged to my wife," he explained when he saw her surprise at Pride and Prejudice. Elizabeth loved her books, said they kept her mind sharp when prairie life tried to dull it. "She sounds wonderful," Hannah said carefully. She was. No elaboration, no descended into maudlin reminiscence, just simple acknowledgement of a truth that needed no embellishment. One evening, perhaps 2 weeks after her arrival, Hannah felt strong enough to join the family for dinner. Mary helped her into one of Elizabeth Reed's dresses, simple calico, well-worn but clean. "It suits you," Mary said, stepping back to examine her handiwork. Hannah caught her reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin. Her face was still gaunt, her eyes haunted, but she looked human. Not the broken creature they'd whipped by the river, but a woman, wounded perhaps, but still standing. The kitchen table was set for 5, and Hannah hesitated at the threshold. This felt too much like belonging, too much like hope, dangerous things for someone like her. "Come sit," Daniel said, pulling out a chair. "Sarah made the biscuits. Fair warning, she's heavy-handed with the salt sometimes." "I am not," Sarah protested, then added in a smaller voice, "only that one time." They sat around the table, and Hannah waited for grace to be said. But Daniel simply began passing dishes, beans, salt pork. The allegedly salty biscuits, which were actually perfectly fine, and preserved peaches that tasted like sunshine. "We don't stand much on ceremony here," Daniel explained, noting her surprise. "Elizabeth used to say that God cared more about what was in our hearts than what came out of our mouths." "Mama was smart," Thomas said, and for the first time he looked directly at Hannah without suspicion. The meal progressed with the easy conversation of a family used to each other's rhythms. Sarah regaled them with a story about the school teacher's ongoing battle with a particularly clever mouse. Mary discussed plans for the vegetable garden. Thomas and Daniel debated whether to plant winter wheat or expand the corn acreage. Hannah listened aghast at the feast, marveling at the simple normalcy of it all. Her meals with Morrison, she couldn't bear to think of him as her husband. Any more had been silent affairs punctuated only by criticism of her cooking, her appearance, her failures as a wife. "Hannah, you're a seamstress by trade, aren't you?" Daniel's question drew her from her reverie. She nodded. "I was. Before—" She stopped, unable to finish. "Mrs. Patterson in town mentioned she's been looking for help with her shop. Her arthritis is getting worse and she can't keep up with orders." Hannah's heart sank. "She won't want me, not after—" "Mrs. Patterson doesn't hold with mob justice," Daniel said firmly. "She was one of the few who spoke against what they did to you." "There were some who spoke against it." Hannah couldn't hide her surprise. "Not enough." Daniel's voice carried bitter acknowledgement. "But some. The minister's wife, Mrs. Patterson, old Doc Brennan. Decent folks appalled by indecent actions." "It won't matter. Morrison has probably poisoned the whole town against me by now. They think I'm cursed barren, a failure as a woman." The sound of Daniel's fist hitting the table made everyone jump. "Enough of that talk in my house." His voice was controlled but carried an undercurrent of fury. "A woman's worth isn't measured by her ability to bear children any more than a man's worth is measured by the acres he owns." "Papa's right," Mary said quietly. "Mama lost 3 babies before she had me. Did that make her worthless?" Hannah's breath caught. She hadn't considered that others might have faced similar struggles. Morrison said, "Morrison is a small, cruel man who needed someone to blame for his own failings." Daniel interrupted. "I've known men like him my whole life. They build themselves up by tearing others down, especially those they're supposed to protect." Thomas pushed his beans around his plate. "Jimmy Morrison says his pa is going to come looking for her. Says he's not done teaching her a lesson." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Daniel's expression became something Hannah had never seen before, cold, dangerous, the face of a man who'd survived war by becoming something warfare required. "Let him come," Daniel said quietly. And somehow that quiet tone was more frightening than any shout. "I've been meaning to have a conversation with Sam Morrison about the proper treatment of women." "Daniel," Hannah started, but he held up a hand. "You're under my protection now. That's not negotiable. He looked around the table at his children. All of you understand that Hannah is our guest, and we defend our own. Yes, Papa, they chorused, and even Thomas nodded firmly. That night, Hannah lay in the small room they'd given her Elizabeth's sewing room, converted hastily into a bedroom. Through the thin walls, she could hear the family settling for the night, Sarah singing softly to herself, Mary telling Thomas to stop reading by candlelight and go to sleep. Daniel's heavy footsteps as he checked the locks and windows, a ritual of safety, of family, of home. Tears came then, hot and unexpected. Not tears of pain or despair, but something else, grief perhaps, for the life she'd never had, the children she'd never bear, the love she'd never known. Or maybe gratitude, though, that seemed too small a word for what she felt. A soft knock interrupted her crying. Hannah, Mary's voice. May I come in? Hannah wiped her face hastily. Yes. Mary entered carrying a lamp and a small jar. Salve for your back. It'll help with the scarring. As Mary helped her apply the medicine, she spoke quietly. I know what it's like, you know, to feel like you don't belong anywhere. After Mama died, I felt like I was playing pretend, trying to be the woman of the house, when I was really just a scared little girl. You do wonderfully, Hannah assured her. Your mother would be proud. Maybe. But what I'm trying to say is, you don't have to earn your place here. Papa doesn't work that way. Neither did Mama. They just see a need and fill it. See a person hurting and help. It's not about deserving or earning. It's just about being human. After Mary left, Hannah lay awake thinking about those words. Being human. Such a simple thing, yet it had been denied her for so long she'd forgotten what it meant. The next morning brought trouble, as Hannah had known it would. She was helping Sarah gather eggs when the sound of horses made them both freeze. 3 riders approached the farm, and even from a distance, Hannah recognized Morrison's stocky frame. Get inside, she told Sarah. Get your father. But go! Sarah ran her small legs, pumping furiously. Hannah stood rooted to the spot, the basket of eggs trembling in her hands. Morrison dismounted, his face red with drink and rage despite the early hour. With him were 2 other men, Jack Crawford and Bill Tompkins' cronies, who'd do whatever Morrison told them. Well, well, Morrison sneered. The whore has found herself a new protector. I'm not. Shut your mouth. Morrison stepped closer, and Hannah could smell the whiskey on his breath. You think you can humiliate me, make me the laughingstock of the town. Bad enough you couldn't give me sons. But now you're spreading your legs for Reed. That's not... Morrison's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist hard enough to bruise. You're coming with me. You're still my wife in the eyes of God, and you'll do your duty even if I have to beat it into you. Let her go. Daniel's voice carried across the yard like thunder. He stood on the porch, rifle in hand, Thomas beside him with another gun. Mary and Sarah watched from the window. This ain't your business, Reed, Morrison snarled. You made it my business when you came onto my land and laid hands on a woman under my protection. Daniel's rifle never wavered. Now let her go get on your horse and ride off. This is your only warning. Crawford and Tompkins exchanged nervous glances. They'd come expecting to intimidate a woman, not face down an armed veteran. Morrison released Hannah's wrist with a shove that sent her stumbling. You always did fancy yourself a hero, Reed. Playing soldier, pretending you're better than the rest of us. I don't pretend anything, Daniel said calmly. I know exactly what I am, a man who's killed before and will kill again if you don't get off my property. You're harboring my wife. Former wife, a new voice interjected. Doc Brennan rode up, followed by the minister, Reverend Carlton. The divorce papers were finalized yesterday. Miss Price is a free woman. Hannah's knees nearly buckled. Divorce. She hadn't even known Morrison had filed. On what grounds? Morrison roared. Abandonment, Doc Brennan said dryly. Seems leaving a woman to die by the river counts as abandoning your marital duties. You can't... It's done, Reverend Carlton said firmly. Before God and law, you have no claim on this woman. Morrison's face turned purple. This isn't over, Reed. You think you're some kind of saint taking in strays and whores. The crack of Daniel's rifle split the air. The shot went into the ground at Morrison's feet, sending up a spray of dirt. The next one goes in you. Daniel said conversationally. Your choice. Morrison scrambled for his horse Crawford, and Tompkins already mounted and ready to flee. You'll regret this, all of you. They rode off in a cloud of dust and curses. Doc Brennan dismounted, approaching Hannah with grandfatherly concern. Let me see that wrist, young lady. As he examined her arm, Reverend Carlton addressed Daniel. Morrison's been spreading poison about you harboring her, making unseemly suggestions about your intentions. Let him talk, Daniel said, though Hannah could see the tension in his jaw. It's affecting your children, the minister said quietly. Young Thomas got into a fight at school yesterday, defending your honor. Daniel's expression darkened further. He looked at Thomas, who suddenly found the porch boards fascinating. We'll weather it, Daniel said finally. Perhaps, Doc Brennan said, finishing his examination of Hannah's wrist. But the girl needs work if she's to rebuild her life. Mrs. Patterson is willing, but only if Hannah comes to town. She can't be seen as showing favoritism. I can't, Hannah said quickly. Not everyone in town is like Morrison, Reverend Carlton said gently. Many were horrified by what happened, but they're afraid to speak up, afraid of becoming targets themselves. Cowards, Thomas muttered. Perhaps the minister agreed. But even cowards can find courage when given the right example. Hannah looked between these men who'd come to her defense then at the Reed family standing together on the porch. I don't want to bring more trouble to this family. The trouble's already here, Daniel said. Question is whether we face it or run from it. That afternoon, Daniel drove Hannah to town in the wagon, Mary and Sarah insisting on accompanying them. Thomas stayed to guard the farm pride evident in being trusted with such responsibility. The journey was tense, every approaching rider making Hannah's heart race. But Daniel seemed unconcerned, discussing plans for the harvest, as if they were simply out for a pleasant ride. The town's main street felt like running a gauntlet. People stopped to stare, some with hostility, others with curiosity, a few with what might have been sympathy. Hannah kept her head high, though her hands trembled in her lap. Mrs. Patterson's shop sat between the general store and the bakery, its window displaying neat rows of fabric and a dress form, wearing a half-finished gown. The elderly woman herself stood in the doorway, her expression stern but not unkind. So you're the Hannah Price I've heard so much about, she said, her voice carrying despite its frailness. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Patterson studied her for a long moment, then nodded decisively. Can you do buttonholes? Yes, ma'am. French and keyhole both. Good. Mine look like a drunk chicken's been pecking at them these days. Arthritis is the devil's own joke on seamstresses. She stepped aside. Come in then. Let's see what you can do. The shop's interior was a seamstress's dream bolts of fabric and every color drawers of notions. 3 sewing machines, including one of the new Singer models. Hannah's fingers itched to touch everything, to lose herself in the familiar comfort of needle and thread. I have 6 orders backed up, Mrs. Patterson said briskly. 2 Sunday dresses, a wedding gown, and 3 shirts for the banker's sons. Can you handle that? Yes, ma'am. Good. You'll work in the back room at first. Not everyone's ready to see you served in the front of the shop. But if you prove yourself, that will change. She paused, her expression softening slightly. I knew your mother, you know, before she passed. Fine seamstress. She'd be proud to see you carrying on the trade. Hannah's throat tightened. Her mother had died when she was 15, leaving her with the skills to support herself, but little else. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I'm a hard taskmaster and I don't suffer sloppy work. You'll earn your keep or you'll be gone. I understand. As Mrs. Patterson showed her the back room where she'd work, Hannah caught sight of Morrison passing by the front window. He stopped, his face twisted with rage when he saw her inside. For a moment, fear paralyzed her. Then Daniel appeared beside Morrison, not touching him but standing close enough to be a clear threat. They exchanged words Hannah couldn't hear, but Morrison's face went pale. He hurried away, Daniel watching until he was out of sight. That man's not done causing trouble, Mrs. Patterson observed. But Reed's a good protector, saved my nephew's life at Chancellorsville, though he'd never brag about it. Hannah began work that very day, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of measuring, cutting, and stitching, Her fingers remembered what her heart had forgotten, that she was skilled, capable, valuable for more than just her failed womb. As the sun began to set, Daniel returned with the girls to collect her. Sarah bounced with excitement. "We sold all our eggs to Mr. Chen at the general store. He said our chickens must be especially happy. And I ordered new primers for the school," Mary added. "The old ones are falling apart." Daniel helped Hannah into the wagon with careful courtesy. "Good first day on—" "Yes," Hannah said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Very good." The ride home was quieter, Sarah drowsing against Mary's shoulder as the wagon rocked gently. The setting sun painted the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, and for a moment Hannah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. It didn't last. That night Hannah woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of shouting. She rushed to the window to see the barn ablaze, flames reaching toward the star-filled sky like desperate fingers. Daniel was already outside, Thomas beside him, both working frantically to release the animals. Mary appeared with buckets, Sarah crying as she tried to help. Hannah didn't think, just acted. She raced outside, grabbing a bucket and joining the futile effort to fight the inferno. The heat was overwhelming, the smoke choking, but she worked alongside the reeds as if she'd always belonged there. "The calf!" Sarah screamed suddenly. "The new calf is still in there!" Before anyone could stop her, Hannah plunged into the burning barn. The smoke was blinding, the heat searing, but she could hear the frightened bleating of the calf. She found it in the far stall, paralyzed with terror. The beam above her head cracked ominously as she struggled with the stall door. Finally it gave way, and she grabbed the calf, half carrying, half dragging it toward what she hoped was the exit. Strong arms grabbed her as she stumbled out, Daniel pulling her and the calf to safety as part of the roof collapsed behind them. They tumbled to the ground, coughing and gasping. "Are you insane?" Daniel roared, his hands running over her arms and face, checking for burns. "The calf," Hannah wheezed. "Sarah's calf!" Sarah threw herself at Hannah, sobbing with relief and terror. "You saved her. You saved Buttercup." As neighbors began arriving, word of the fire spreading quickly, Hannah realized something had shifted. The way people looked at her had changed. She wasn't just the barren woman who'd been whipped by the river. She was the woman who'd risked her life for a child's beloved calf. Old Mrs. Chen pressed a cool cloth to Hannah's forehead. "Brave girl," she murmured. "Very brave." Even some who'd stood silent during her punishment now offered help, buckets of water, blankets, gentle hands. Not everyone, but enough. A beginning. They saved most of the animals, but lost the barn and half their winter feed. As dawn broke over the smoking ruins, Daniel stood with his children, surveying the damage. "We'll rebuild," he said simply. "With what money?" Thomas asked, exhaustion making him blunt. "We'll manage. We always do." Hannah stepped forward, surprising herself with her boldness. "I'll help. My wages for Mrs. Patterson are yours," Daniel interrupted firmly. "You earned them." "You saved my life. Let me help save your barn." Their eyes met and something passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but understanding. Recognition of one wounded soul by another. "We'll all help," Mary said firmly. "That's what family does." The word hung in the air, family. Sarah slipped her small hand into Hannah's soot-covered one. Thomas nodded grudgingly. And Daniel's expression was unreadable, but he didn't correct his daughter. Over the following weeks, the rebuilding began. To Hannah's amazement, help came from unexpected quarters. The minister organized work parties after church. Doc Brennan, despite his age, hammered boards alongside younger men. Mrs. Patterson donated fabric for new curtains once the structure was complete, insisting it was surplus inventory. Not everyone helped. Morrison and his cronies watched from afar, spreading rumors and discontent. But their voices grew quieter as more people chose compassion over cruelty. Hannah threw herself into both her work at the shop and helping the Reeds. She discovered she had a talent for organization, keeping track of supplies and coordinating the volunteers. In the evenings, she helped Mary with dinner, taught Sarah embroidery, and even began helping Thomas with his geometry homework. "You're good at this," Thomas admitted one evening as she explained angles. "Better than the teacher." "I had a good education before," she trailed off. Before Morrison, Thomas finished bluntly. What did you see in him anyway? Thomas? Mary scolded. It's all right, Hannah said. I was 17 when my mother died. Morrison was handsome, charming, established. He promised security, a home, children. I was young and scared and alone. But he lied, Sarah said indignantly. Yes, Hannah agreed simply. He lied. Daniel, who'd been reading by the fire, looked up. Men like Morrison are skilled at showing only what they want you to see. It's not your fault you believed him. I should have seen. No. Daniel's voice was firm. The only person responsible for Morrison's cruelty is Morrison. As autumn progressed, Hannah's position in the town gradually improved. Her work at Mrs. Patterson's shop was impeccable, and slowly customers began requesting her specifically. She had a gift for understanding what would flatter each woman's figure, for adding small touches that elevated simple garments into something special. One day, the mayor's wife herself came in needing a dress for the harvest dance. She pointedly ignored Hannah at first, but when she saw the gown Hannah had designed for the banker's daughter, her resolution wavered. Could you do something similar for me? She asked reluctantly. In blue, perhaps? Of course, Mrs. Ashford, Hannah replied professionally. Let me show you some fabrics. As Hannah took her measurements and discussed options, Mrs. Ashford slowly thawed. I didn't agree with what they did to you, she finally admitted quietly. But my husband, I couldn't speak against him publicly. Hannah could have been bitter, could have thrown the woman's cowardice back in her face. Instead, she said, I understand. Sometimes survival means staying silent. Mrs. Ashford's eyes filled with tears. I have 3 daughters. What happened to you? It could happen to any of us who fail to meet our husband's expectations. It was a crack in the wall of public opinion, small but significant. The harvest dance arrived with all its attendant excitement. Hannah had no intention of going despite Sarah's pleading, but Daniel surprised her. You should go, he said one evening as they all sat around the dinner table. Show them you're not hiding. I have nothing to wear, Hannah protested. Mary and Sarah exchanged conspiratorial glances. Actually, Mary began. They led her to her room where a dress hung on the wardrobe's soft green wool that would complement her coloring perfectly with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. We made it, Sarah announced proudly. Well, Mary did most of the sewing, but I helped with the embroidery. When how? We've been working on it in secret, Mary admitted. Mrs. Patterson helped with the difficult parts. Hannah touched the dress with trembling fingers. It wasn't fancy, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. More importantly, it was made with love. I can't. Yes, you can, Daniel said from the doorway. We're all going as a family, and you're part of this family now, whether you've realized it or not. The night of the dance, Hannah's hands shook as she dressed. The green dress fit perfectly, and Mary had insisted on arranging her hair. Looking in the mirror, Hannah saw not the broken woman from the riverside, but someone new, still scarred, still wounded, but standing. The Reeds made quite a picture arriving together, Daniel, in his one good suit, Thomas trying not to tug at his collar, Mary in her mother's altered rose-colored dress, Sarah spinning to make her skirts twirl, and Hannah walking beside them like she belonged. The community hall fell silent as they entered. Morrison was there, of course, glowering from beside the punch bowl. But so were the Pattersons, the Chens, Doc Brennan, Reverend Carlton, and dozens of others. For a moment that stretched like eternity, no one moved. Then Mrs. Patterson, bless her, marched over. Hannah, dear, you look lovely. Daniel, always a pleasure. Mary, is that your mother's dress? She would be so proud to see you in it. The spell broke. Others approached cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Not everyone, but more than Hannah, had dared hope. When the music started, couples began to dance. Hannah stood at the edge, content to watch when Daniel appeared at her elbow. Would you honor me with a dance? People will talk. Let them. He offered his hand. I've faced worse than gossip. They danced carefully, properly, with appropriate distance between them. But Hannah felt the strength in his arms, the steadiness of his presence, and for the first time in years felt safe in a man's company. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. You've given as much as you've received. Daniel replied. My children haven't been this happy since Elizabeth died. You've brought light back to our home. Before Hannah could respond, there was a commotion near the door. Morrison, drunk and belligerent, was shoving his way toward them. Get your hands off my wife. Former wife, Daniel said calmly, not releasing Hannah. Morrison swung wildly. Daniel sidestepped, and Morrison's momentum carried him crashing into the refreshment table. Cider and cookies went flying. You've ruined everything, Morrison slurred, struggling to his feet. She was mine, my property. And you, he pointed at Hannah, you're nothing but a barren whore who... That's enough. The mayor's voice cut through Morrison's tirade. Sam Morrison, you're drunk and disorderly. Sheriff, escort him out. You can't... I'm a respected member of this community. Mrs. Ashford said clearly, stepping forward in the blue dress Hannah had made for her. You were respected until you showed us who you really are. One by one, others stepped forward, forming a barrier between Morrison and Hannah. Not everyone, but enough. More than enough. Morrison was dragged out screaming threats and curses. In the silence that followed, Hannah waited for people to turn on her to blame her for the disruption. Instead, the minister's wife started the music again. I believe this is a dance, not a drama performance. Shall we continue? Couples returned to the floor. Children resumed their games, and Daniel offered Hannah his hand once more. Still want to dance? This time, Hannah didn't hesitate. Yes. As they danced, she saw her reflection in the window, no longer alone, no longer broken, but part of something larger. The Reed children watched from the side, Sarah bouncing with excitement, Mary smiling softly, even Thomas looking pleased. Hannah, Daniel said quietly, I need to say something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. She nodded. I'm not looking for a replacement for Elizabeth. No one could be that. But you've become essential to us, to our family. The children love you, and I... He paused, choosing words carefully. I care for you. Not out of pity or duty, but genuine affection. Hannah's breath caught. Daniel, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, but I want you to know that you have a home with us for as long as you want it. Not as our guest or our charity case, but as family. I don't know if I can ever be a proper wife again, Hannah whispered. After everything. I'm not asking you to be a proper anything, Daniel interrupted gently. Just be Hannah. That's more than enough. Before she could respond, Sarah tugged at her skirt. Miss Hannah, will you teach me to dance like that? As Hannah looked down at the eager little face, then at Mary's encouraging smile, and Thomas's awkward but genuine grin, she felt something she'd thought lost forever hope. Not just for survival, but for happiness, for belonging, for love in all its forms. Of course, sweetheart, she said to Sarah. I'll teach you everything I know. Daniel stepped back to let Sarah take his place, and as Hannah guided the little girl through the basic steps, she caught his eye over Sarah's head. The promise she saw there of patience, of protection, of possibility, made her believe that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't ending, but beginning. The barn stood completed, now evidence of what a community could do when it chose compassion over cruelty. Hannah Price, once broken by the riverside, had discovered that sometimes the greatest strength came from allowing others to help you stand. And in the Reed family, she'd found not just shelter from the storm, but a reason to weather whatever storms might come. As the evening progressed, Hannah danced with each of the Reed children, helped serve refreshments, and even joined in the Virginia reel when Mrs. Patterson insisted. Morrison's outburst had been the last gasp of the old order. The town was choosing a new path, and where a woman's worth wasn't measured in her womb's productivity, but in the content of her character. When they finally returned home that night, Sarah asleep in Daniel's arms, and Thomas actually helping Mary down from the wagon without being asked, Hannah felt the truth of it in her bones. She was home. Not in the house, though it sheltered her. Not in the town, though it was slowly accepting her. But with these people who'd chosen her as surely as she'd chosen them. Thank you for making me go, she told Daniel, as they stood on the porch, the children already inside. Thank you for being brave enough to face them, he replied. They stood there in comfortable silence, looking out over the prairie bathed in moonlight. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Morrison would cause more trouble. Some townspeople would never accept her, and the ghosts of their respective pasts would always linger. But for the first time in her life, Hannah wasn't facing those challenges alone. "Daniel," she said softly. "Yes, I care for you too, all of you, more than I have words to express." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his war-weathered face into something almost boyish. "That's a good start, Hannah. That's a very good start." As they went inside, Hannah noticed something Mary had embroidered and hung by the door, "Family is more than blood." Indeed it was. Family was choice, courage, and commitment. It was standing together when the world tried to tear you apart. It was a scarred woman and a haunted soldier, 3 motherless children and 1 childless mother choosing to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of their lives. The 100 lashes had been meant to break her, to mark her as worthless. But Hannah Price had discovered that scars could be proof of survival, not shame. And in the Reed family's fierce protection and growing love, she'd found something more valuable than the approval of narrow-minded townspeople or the children her body couldn't give. She'd found herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Morrison wouldn't give up easily. The town's transformation would be slow and sometimes painful. There would be setbacks and sorrows along the way. But tonight, Hannah Price went to sleep in a home filled with love, her heart full of gratitude for the strange, difficult, beautiful journey that had brought her here. The whip had failed to destroy her. Morrison had failed to diminish her. And with the Reeds beside her, Hannah knew she would not just survive but thrive, building a life defined not by what she couldn't give, but by all the love she had to offer. In the distance, a coyote howled at the moon, but Hannah didn't shiver. She was safe, she was valued, and she was home. The woman who'd been whipped by the river was gone. In her place stood Hannah Price, seamstress, sister-daughter, and maybe someday soon Daniel Reed's wife. Not because she needed his protection, but because she chose his partnership. The first part of her story was ending, but the best chapters were yet to be written. The weeks following the harvest dance brought a deceptive calm to the Reed homestead, like the stillness before a prairie storm. Hannah had settled into a rhythm that felt dangerously close to contentment, working at Mrs. Patterson's shop during the day, returning home to help with dinner and homework in the evenings, sitting by the fire, while Daniel read aloud from his books and the children worked on their various projects. But Morrison hadn't disappeared. He'd been seen drinking heavily at the saloon, gathering his cronies around him like a general planning a campaign. The sheriff, a weak man who owed his position to Morrison's influence, did little to curb his increasingly violent rhetoric. "He's planning something," Thomas said one evening as they sat down to dinner. "He'd just returned from town where he'd gone to pick up supplies. I heard Jack Crawford talking at the general store. Said Morrison's got some plan to run us off our land." Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Let him plan. This is our home. We're not going anywhere." "But Papa," Mary interjected. Her face creased with worry. "What if he tries to hurt Hannah again?" "Then he'll have to go through me first," Daniel said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Hannah felt her chest tighten at his matter-of-fact protectiveness. "I shouldn't have stayed. I've brought nothing but trouble." "Stop." Sarah's small voice carried surprising authority. "You brought happiness. You brought laughter. You brought love back to this house." The simple truth from the 8-year-old's lips silenced any further protest. Hannah reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. That night, unable to sleep, Hannah found Daniel on the porch, his rifle across his lap as he kept watch. The moon was new, leaving the prairie in darkness, broken only by stars. "You should rest," she said softly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cool night air. "Can't sleep when I know trouble's brewing," he replied, making room for her on the bench beside him. "Learned that in the war. The waiting is almost worse than the fighting." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, crickets and owl in the distance, the rustle of wind through the dry grass. "Tell me about Elizabeth," Hannah said suddenly, surprising herself with the request. Daniel was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "She was nothing like what I expected to find out here. Came from Boston, educated, could quote Shakespeare, and solve mathematical equations that made my head spin. Her father thought she was too headstrong, figured the frontier would tame her." "Did it?" A soft chuckle. No, she tamed the frontier instead. Taught half the town's children to read before we even had a proper school. Started a lending library out of our front room. Convinced the most stubborn German farmers to try new cultivation methods by arguing with them in their own language. She'd taught herself German just for that purpose. She sounds remarkable. She was, but she was also human. Had a temper that could strip paint when riled. Couldn't cook worth a damn. When we first married, I lived on burnt beans and raw biscuit for 6 months before she got the hang of it, and she grieved something terrible over the babies we lost. Hannah's breath caught. Mary mentioned 3. 2 before Mary 1 between Mary and Thomas. Each loss nearly broke her. She'd lock herself in our room for days, wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak. I didn't know how to help her, just sat outside the door and talked to her through the wood until she was ready to come out. How did she bear it? By deciding that the children we did have deserved all the love we would have given to the ones we lost. She poured everything into Mary, Thomas, and Sarah. Maybe too much. Sometimes she could be overprotective, seeing danger in every cough or scrape. That's understandable. Is it? Daniel turned to look at her in the darkness. You haven't let your losses make you bitter or fearful. You saved Sarah's calf from a burning barn. You face Morrison's threats with more courage than most men would. Elizabeth would have admired that about you. You can't know that. I can, because I knew my wife, and she valued courage above all else. Physical courage, yes, but more importantly, the courage to keep living after life has knocked you down. The courage to remain kind when the world has been cruel. He paused. The courage to risk loving again when love has brought you nothing but pain. The weight of his words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Neither was quite ready to acknowledge fully. I dream about them sometimes, Hannah admitted quietly. The babies I never had. I see their faces, hear their laughter. Then I wake up and remember they never existed, and the grief is fresh all over again. They existed, Daniel said firmly. In your hopes, your dreams, your love for them. That's real, Hannah. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Before she could respond, a sound made them both freeze, horses moving fast through the darkness. Daniel was on his feet instantly, rifle ready. Get inside, he ordered. Wake Thomas. Tell him to watch the back. But Hannah didn't move. We faced this together, remember? The riders came into view, 6 of them with Morrison at the lead. They stopped just outside rifle range, their torches casting dancing shadows. Read. Morrison's voice carried across the yard. Send out my wife, and we'll leave peaceable. For the last time, Morrison. She's not your wife, Daniel called back. And you're trespassing, state your business, or get off my land. My business is justice. That barren bitch humiliated me, and now she's turned you against me too. Half the town thinks I'm some kind of monster because of her lies. Nobody had to lie about you, Sam, Daniel replied coldly. You showed everyone exactly what you are when you had a woman whipped like an animal. One of the riders, a man Hannah didn't recognize, spoke up. We don't want trouble, Reed. But Morrison here says you stole his property, says he's got legal right to reclaim what's his. The only thing Sam Morrison has a legal right to is a jail cell for assault and attempted murder, Daniel responded. Now I'll say this once more, get off my land. Morrison laughed an ugly sound. You think you're some kind of hero, Reed? You're nothing but a broken-down soldier playing house with a barren whore. The shot came from behind Hannah. She turned to see Thomas on the porch, his rifle smoking. The bullet had taken Morrison's hat clean off. The next one goes through your skull, Thomas said, his young voice steady despite the magnitude of his threat. Nobody talks about Miss Hannah that way. For a moment, everything balanced on a knife's edge. Then Mary's voice rang out from an upstairs window. Sheriff Daniels, Reverend Carlton, come quick. Morrison's brought a mob. It was a lie. The sheriff and Reverend were nowhere near, but Morrison's men didn't know that. They looked around nervously, suddenly aware they could be outnumbered. This isn't over, Morrison snarled, wheeling his horse around. You'll pay for this, all of you. They rode off, but the threat lingered like smoke in the air. Good shooting, son, Daniel said to Thomas, and Mary quick thinking. We're a family, Mary said simply. We protect each other. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Hannah was helping Sarah feed the chickens when a carriage pulled up far too fine for their humble farm. To her amazement, Judge Harrison from the county seat stepped out, followed by a woman Hannah didn't recognize, elegantly dressed with steel gray hair and sharp eyes. "Mr. Reed," the judge called. "Might we have a word?" Daniel emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Judge Harrison, to what do we owe the honor?" "This is Mrs. Adelaide Thornton from Chicago, so," the judge said. Well, perhaps we should discuss this inside." They gathered in the kitchen, the children hovering curiously as the adults sat around the table. Mrs. Thornton studied Hannah with uncomfortable intensity. "You're Hannah Price?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Formerly Hannah Morrison." Hannah's stomach clenched. "Yes." Mrs. Thornton reached into her bag and pulled out a daguerreotype. "Is this your mother?" Hannah gasped. It was indeed her mother, but younger than Hannah had ever seen her. "How do you—" "Your mother was my sister," Mrs. Thornton said quietly. "My younger sister who ran away to marry a farmer against our father's wishes. We lost touch after she left. I've been searching for her for 20 years only to discover she died a decade ago." Hannah's world tilted. "Mother never mentioned family in Chicago." "Our father was unforgiving. He forbade contact, but he's dead now, and I've spent the last 5 years trying to find Margaret's children." She paused. "You're her only child?" "Yes." "Then you're my only niece, and as such you're entitled to your inheritance." "Inheritance?" Judge Harrison cleared his throat. "Your grandfather was Marcus Thornton, the railroad magnate. When he died, he left provisions for his descendants, including those he disowned. Your mother's share has been in trust, gathering interest." Hannah couldn't process what she was hearing. "I don't understand." "It's not a fortune," Mrs. Thornton said. "About $3,000, but enough to start fresh to build a life free from men like Morrison." $3,000. It might as well have been $3 million to Hannah, who'd been grateful for the few dollars a week she earned at Mrs. Patterson's shop. "Why now?" Daniel asked, ever suspicious of good fortune. "Why come looking now?" "Because I read about what happened," Mrs. Thornton admitted. "The story made the Chicago papers, a woman whipped for barrenness in Kansas. The name Hannah Price, formerly Morrison, caught my attention. I hired investigators, confirmed the connection." She looked at Hannah with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. Sorry I couldn't prevent what happened to you." "It's not your fault," Hannah said softly. "Perhaps not, but family should protect family. I failed in that." She straightened. "But I can help now. The money is yours free and clear. There's also a standing invitation to come to Chicago if you want to leave this place behind." Hannah looked around the kitchen at Daniel's concerned face, at Mary's worried expression, at Thomas trying to appear disinterested while hanging on every word, at Sarah openly crying at the thought of Hannah leaving. "This is my home," Hannah said firmly. "These people are my family, but thank you for the offer." Mrs. Thornton studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "Your mother would be proud. She always did value love over money." She stood. "The judge has the paperwork for the inheritance. I'll be staying at the hotel in town for a few days if you'd like to talk more about your mother." After they left, the Reeds sat in stunned silence. Finally, Thomas spoke. $3,000. You could go anywhere, do anything." "I could," Hannah agreed. "Or I could invest in expanding the farm, help rebuild after the barn fire properly. Maybe even help send you all to college someday." "That's your money, child," Daniel protested. "For your future." "My future is here," Hannah interrupted. "If you'll have me." Sarah launched herself at Hannah, nearly knocking her off her chair. "You're staying. Really staying. If your father agrees." "Of course I agree," Daniel said gruffly. "But Hannah, you need to think about this. That money represents freedom." "I am free," Hannah said. "For the first time in my life, I'm truly free. Free to choose my own path, my own family, my own home. And I choose this. I choose all of you." Mary was crying now too, trying to hide it by busying herself at the stove. Thomas cleared his throat repeatedly, blinking hard. And Daniel looked at her with such raw emotion that Hannah felt her own eyes fill. Then we should discuss the future properly, he said. As a family. The news of Hannah's inheritance spread through town like wildfire. Suddenly, people who'd shunned her were eager to renew acquaintance. Morrison predictably claimed she'd hidden assets during their marriage, that the money rightfully belonged to him. Let him try, Mrs. Thornton said coolly when she heard. She'd extended her stay and proved to be a formidable ally. I've brought my lawyers from Chicago. They'll eat him alive in court. The confrontation came to a head 3 days later at a town meeting Morrison had demanded. The entire town gathered in the church, the atmosphere thick with tension. Morrison stood at the front, his face red with drink and rage. This woman, he pointed at Hannah, deceived me throughout our marriage. She had rich relatives, inheritance rights, and she hid it all. I didn't know, Hannah said clearly, standing despite her trembling knees. My mother never told me about her family. Lies, Morrison roared. Everything about her is lies. She couldn't give me children, couldn't be a proper wife, and now she's bewitched Reed and his family. That's enough. Daniel stood beside Hannah. You want to attack someone? Morrison, attack me. Leave her out of it. You're so eager to defend her, Morrison sneered. Tell me, Reed, does she warm your bed as poorly as she warmed mine? The crack of Daniel's fist against Morrison's jaw was enormously satisfying. Morrison went down hard, blood streaming from his nose. Anyone else want to insult this woman? Daniel asked calmly, rubbing his knuckles. The church was silent. Then Mrs. Ashford stood. I have something to say. She walked to the front, her hand shaking, but her voice clear. Sam Morrison is a brute and a bully. I've watched him terrorize this town for years, and we've all been too cowardly to stand up to him. Well, I'm done being a coward. Careful, woman, Morrison snarled from the floor. Or what, you'll have me whipped too. Mrs. Ashford looked around the room. How many of us have daughters? How many of us worry what will happen to them if they can't bear children or if they marry men like Morrison? We allowed Hannah to be tortured for something beyond her control. We're all complicit in that shame. One by one, other women began standing. Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Chen, the minister's wife, even some of Morrison's former supporters' wives. Sit down, the mayor commanded his wife. No, Mrs. Ashford said simply. I won't be silent anymore. The meeting devolved into chaos, but something fundamental had shifted. The women of the town, long silent, had found their voices, and they were standing with Hannah. Judge Harrison, who'd stayed to oversee the inheritance paperwork, restored order. Mr. Morrison, you have no legal claim to Miss Price's inheritance. Furthermore, I'm recommending to the county prosecutor that you be charged with assault and battery for the whipping incident. You can't. I can and I will. Sheriff Daniels, do your job or I'll find someone who will. The sheriff, faced with the judge's authority, reluctantly moved toward Morrison, but Morrison's cronies closed ranks around him. You want to fight? Morrison shouted. I'll give you a war. This town is mine. I built it. I own half of it, and I won't be driven out by a barren whore and her borrowed family. That's when Sarah did something unexpected. The 8-year-old marched right up to Morrison, looked him in the eye, and said in her clear child's voice, You're a mean, sad, lonely man, and nobody loves you. That's why you hurt people. But we won't let you hurt Hannah anymore. She's ours now. The simple truth from a child's lips seemed to deflate Morrison entirely. He looked around the room at the women standing against him, at the men no longer willing to follow him, at the children who saw him for the monster he was. This isn't over, he said. But the threat sounded hollow now. Yes, it is, Hannah said, stepping forward. I forgive you, Samuel, not for your sake, but for mine. I won't carry the poison of hatred anymore. You have no power over me. Morrison fled the church, his few remaining allies trailing behind. The town watched them go, and it felt like an exorcism of something dark and poisonous that had infected their community for too long. That evening, the Reed farm was full of visitors. Mrs. Thornton had arranged for a photographer from the county seat to come, insisting on documenting the family that chose each other. They posed on the porch, Daniel in the center with Hannah beside him, the children arranged around them, even Mrs. Thornton insisting on being included. You have your mother's strength, she told Hannah, as they waited for the photographer to prepare his equipment. Margaret would have loved seeing you like this, surrounded by love standing tall despite everything. Tell me about her, Hannah requested. The parts I never knew. So Mrs. Thornton told stories of a young Margaret who climbed trees in petticoats, who argued theology with priests who read medical texts in secret because women couldn't be doctors. A Margaret who chose love over wealth and never regretted it. She wrote to me once, Mrs. Thornton admitted, after you were born, said you were her greatest achievement, her defiance of Father's prophecy that she'd amount to nothing. She was so proud of you, even as a baby. Hannah wiped away tears, feeling her mother's presence strongly for the first time since her death. The photographer called for stillness, and they all froze a tableau of an unconventional family bound by choice rather than blood. When the image was developed weeks later, it would show something remarkable, genuine happiness on every face, the kind that couldn't be faked or forced. As the evening wound down and visitors departed, Daniel found Hannah alone on the porch, watching the stars emerge. "Quite a day," he said, settling beside her. "Life-changing," she agreed. "About that money. I meant what I said. It's for our future. All of us." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Hannah, I need to say something, and I need you to understand I'm not saying it because of the money." She turned to face him, heart racing. "I love you, Chum," he said simply. "I've been falling in love with you since the day I found you by that river. Not because you needed saving, but because even broken and bleeding, you were still fighting to survive. You've brought light back to my children's lives, peace back to my heart, and hope back to our home. Daniel, I know you might not be ready. I know Morrison hurt you in ways I probably can't fully understand, but I want you to know that I'm here waiting for as long as it takes. And if you never want more than friendship and partnership, that's enough. Having you in our lives in any capacity is a gift." Hannah looked at this man, scarred by war, weathered by loss, but still capable of such tenderness. She thought of all the reasons she should be afraid, all the wounds that hadn't fully healed. Then she thought of Sarah's simple faith, Mary's quiet support, Thomas's fierce protection, and Daniel's steady presence. "I love you too," she whispered. "All of you. I'm terrified of failing you, of not being enough, of my body betraying us if we want children." "You could never not be enough," Daniel interrupted. "You're already everything we need, everything I need. The rest, we'll face it together." He kissed her, then gentle and patient, a promise rather than a demand. Hannah felt something broken inside her finally begin to mend. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough to believe in the possibility of happiness. "Gross!" Sarah's voice came from the window, followed by Mary's gentle scolding and Thomas's laughter. Daniel and Hannah broke apart, laughing themselves. "We have an audience," Daniel noted. "We always will," Hannah replied. That's what family means. No privacy, constant chaos, and someone always needing something. And love, Hannah added. So much love it makes everything else worthwhile. The next weeks brought rapid changes. With Hannah's inheritance and Mrs. Thornton's business connections, they were able to expand the farm significantly. They purchased the adjacent land that Morrison had been forced to sell to pay his legal fees after Judge Harrison's charges went through. It felt like poetic justice, turning his former territory into part of their growing homestead. Mrs. Thornton extended her stay again, claiming she needed to ensure her investment was properly managed, but really just enjoying being part of a family again. She taught Sarah French, helped Mary with advanced mathematics, and engaged Thomas in heated debates about literature that delighted them both. "You should have been a teacher," Hannah told her one evening as they watched Mrs. Thornton help Thomas with his Latin. "Women of my generation and class didn't have careers," Mrs. Thornton replied. "We had accomplishments. But watching your family, seeing how you've all chosen to build something together, it makes me think perhaps it's not too late to choose differently." She ended up staying permanently, purchasing a small house in town, but spending most of her time at the Reed farm. She became Aunt Adelaide to the children, a bridge between their simple prairie life and the wider world of possibilities. Morrison's final attempt at revenge came on a cold November night. He arrived alone, drunk with a torch in his hand. "If I can't have her, no one can," he shouted, weaving toward the barn. But Daniel was ready. He'd been expecting something like this. Instead of violence, he chose something else, pity. "Look at yourself, Sam," he called from the porch. "Look at what you've become. You had a beautiful wife, a good position in town, respect. You threw it all away because you couldn't accept that some things are beyond our control. She was supposed to give me sons. No, she was supposed to be your partner, your equal, your love. You turned her into property and wondered why she couldn't bloom. Morrison stood there, torch flickering in his shaking hand. I loved her. You loved owning her. There's a difference. The torch fell from Morrison's nerveless fingers, extinguishing itself in the dirt. He collapsed to his knees, sobbing an ugly, broken sound. Hannah emerged from the house, moving past Daniel despite his attempt to stop her. She knelt in front of her former husband, seeing him clearly. For perhaps the first time, not a monster, but a small, frightened man who'd been taught that domination was strength and gentleness was weakness. I forgive you, she said again, meaning it completely this time. Be better, Samuel. It's not too late to change. He looked at her through his tears, something almost like recognition in his eyes. Then he stumbled to his feet and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. They never saw him again. Word came months later that he'd headed west to California seeking gold or redemption or just escape. Winter arrived with its usual fierce beauty blanketing the prairie in snow. The Reed household now expanded, with Mrs. Thornton's presence settled into cozy rhythms. Evenings were filled with music. Mary had inherited her mother's piano, and Hannah discovered she had a pleasant singing voice. Thomas revealed an unexpected talent for storytelling, regaling them with tales that grew more elaborate with each telling. Sarah organized theatrical productions, assigning everyone roles in her imaginative plays. And Daniel smiled, more laughed. Easier, carried himself with a lightness Hannah hadn't seen before. The ghosts of war still visited his dreams sometimes, but now, when he woke, she was there to hold him until the trembling stopped. One evening in December, as snow fell softly outside and the family gathered around the fire, Daniel stood and cleared his throat. I have something to say, he announced. Everyone turned to him expectantly. He walked to Hannah, then dropped to one knee. Hannah Price, you've already said yes to being part of this family. You've already shown us more love and courage than we ever deserved. But I'm asking you now officially, in front of everyone who matters to us, will you marry me? Not because you need protection, not because it's proper, but because I love you and want to spend every day of the rest of my life showing you how much, Sarah squealed. Mary gasped. Thomas grinned. Mrs. Thornton dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. Hannah looked around at all of them. Her chosen family, her unexpected joy, her second chance at life, and knew there was only one answer. Yes, she said, dropping to her knees to kiss him while the children cheered and Mrs. Thornton declared it was about time. The wedding was set for spring, when the prairie would be green again and the world would feel full of possibility. The whole town would be invited, those who'd stood by them, and those who'd stood against them, because forgiveness and moving forward were more important than holding on to old wounds. As Hannah lay in bed that night, she thought about the journey that had brought her here from the riverside where she'd been left to die to this warm house full of love. The scars on her back would always be there, reminding her of human cruelty, but they were just lines on skin now, not definitions of her worth. She thought of the children she'd never bear acknowledging that grief would always be part of her. But she also thought of Mary Thomas and Sarah, children of her heart, if not her body, who'd claimed her as surely as she'd claimed them. Most of all, she thought of Daniel's words, "You're already everything we need." For the first time in her life, Hannah Price believed she was enough, scarred but not broken, childless, but not motherless, chosen and choosing in equal measure. The winter deepened, bringing challenges and joys in equal measure. A blizzard trapped them inside for 3 days, but instead of crisis, it became an adventure. They told stories, played charades, and Mrs. Thornton taught them all to waltz in the kitchen while Sarah played her mother's piano. When the snow finally cleared, they emerged to find their neighbors had been busy. A new sign hung at the property entrance, "Reed Family Farm, all welcome." The town had taken up a collection to commission it, a gesture of acceptance and apology combined. "It should say Reed Price Family Farm," Sarah insisted. "After the wedding," Daniel promised, ruffling her hair. But Hannah had a different idea. "What about just home? That's what this place is after all." As spring approached with its promise of renewal, Hannah stood on the porch watching the snow melt and the first green shoots emerge. Daniel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Regrets?" he asked softly. "None," she replied, leaning back into his strength. "Not one." "The town's talking about us again," he mentioned. "But this time it's different. They're calling us an example of redemption and grace." Hannah laughed. "From scandal to inspiration, what a journey." "Our journey," he corrected. "And it's just beginning." Inside, she could hear the children arguing about something trivial, Mrs. Thornton mediating with her usual dry wit. It was chaos and noise and imperfection, everything a home should be. "Daniel," she said. "Yes. Thank you for finding me by the river. Thank you for seeing me as more than my circumstances." "Thank you for saving us right back," he replied. "We were surviving before you came. Now, we're living." As the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded Hannah of hope itself, she knew that every lash, every cruel word, every moment of despair had been worth it to arrive at this moment, standing with the man she loved, listening to the family she'd chosen, looking forward to a future she'd never dared imagine. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would be those who'd never fully accept them, those who'd always see her as the barren woman who'd been whipped by the river. But there would also be joy and laughter, love and belonging, the simple daily miracles of a life lived fully despite its scars. Hannah Price, soon to be. Hannah Reed had learned the greatest truth of all. Sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born to, and sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the greatest losses. Her body might never give Daniel children, but her heart had given him and his children something equally precious, a reason to believe in happiness again. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Hannah made a silent promise to Elizabeth Reed, the woman she'd never met, but whose family she now cherished. "I'll take care of them. I'll love them with everything I have, and I'll make sure they never forget you while still allowing them to move forward." A cool breeze carried the scent of coming rain, promising growth and renewal. Hannah smiled, pulling Daniel closer, already hearing wedding bells in the distance and seeing a future bright with possibility. The woman who'd been whipped 100 times for the crime of being barren had discovered that fertility came in many forms in love given and received in families, built from choice rather than chance, in the courage to keep living when life seemed unbearable. And that, Hannah thought, as she turned to kiss the man who'd saved her in every way a person could be saved, was the greatest harvest of all. Spring arrived with unusual fervor that year, as if nature itself was celebrating the upcoming wedding. The prairie burst into bloom with wildflowers that Sarah insisted on picking every day, filling the house with color and fragrance. Hannah found herself standing at the kitchen window more often than necessary, watching Daniel work the fields with Thomas. Their movements synchronized in the way of men who understood each other without words. "You're going to wear a hole in that floor if you keep pacing," Mrs. Thornton observed from her seat at the table where she was helping Mary with the wedding dress alterations. "I'm not pacing," Hannah protested, though she immediately stilled her restless movements. "Pre-wedding nerves are perfectly normal." Mrs. Thornton continued her needle, never pausing in its precise stitches. "Though I dare say you have less to be nervous about than most brides. You already know this family, their rhythms and quirks. You've seen Daniel at his worst and chosen to stay." "That's what frightens me," Hannah admitted quietly. "What if I'm not what he thinks I am? What if the reality of marriage to a barren woman—" The sharp crack of Mrs. Thornton's hand on the table made both Hannah and Mary jump. "Enough," the older woman said firmly. "I've watched that man look at you like you hung the moon and stars. I've seen those children bloom under your care. You are exactly what this family needs, and they are exactly what you need. Biology be damned." "Aunt Adelaide," Mary gasped at the language. "Sometimes strong words are necessary for strong truth," Mrs. Thornton replied primly. "Now, Hannah, come here and try on this dress. We need to make sure the alterations are perfect." The dress had been Elizabeth's wedding gown, stored carefully in lavender and tissue paper. When Daniel had offered it, Hannah had initially refused, feeling it was too sacred, too much Elizabeth's. But Mary had insisted. "Mama would want it to be worn again," she'd said. She believed beautiful things should be used, not hidden away. And she would have loved you, Hannah. I know it in my bones. Now, as Hannah slipped into the ivory silk with its delicate lace overlay, she felt not like she was replacing Elizabeth, but honoring her, continuing a story of love that death had interrupted but not ended. "You look beautiful." Mary breathed, her eyes filling with tears. She quickly blinked away. "Like a fairy princess, huh?" Sarah exclaimed, bursting through the door with an armful of wildflowers. "Papa's going to faint when he sees you." "Your father doesn't faint." Hannah laughed, but she was secretly pleased by the child's enthusiasm. "He might," Thomas said from the doorway where he'd appeared with his usual silent tread. "You look different." "Good different," he added hastily. It was as close to a compliment as the 14-year-old ever gave, and Hannah treasured it accordingly. The wedding was set for the following Saturday, and it seemed the entire town was determined to be involved. Mrs. Patterson organized the church flowers, the minister's wife coordinated the food, and even Mrs. Ashford, the mayor's wife, offered to play the piano for the ceremony. "It's their way of making amends," Reverend Carlton explained when he came to discuss the ceremony details. "What happened to you woke something in this town's conscience. People want to be part of something good now, something healing." But not everyone was ready to celebrate. 3 days before the wedding, Hannah was at the shop finishing a rush order when she heard familiar voices outside. Morrison's old cronies, Jack Crawford and Bill Tompkins, were loitering near the window. "Can't believe Reed's actually marrying that woman," Crawford muttered, "after everything acting like she's some kind of prize." "Morrison had the right idea, just went about it wrong," Tompkins agreed. "Woman like that needs a firm hand, not coddling." Hannah's hands trembled on the fabric she was hemming, but she forced herself to continue working. She'd learned that responding to such talk only encouraged it. The shop door's bell chimed, and both men fell silent. Hannah looked up to see Daniel entering his presence, filling the small space with quiet authority. "Gentlemen," he said coolly to Crawford and Tompkins, "I believe you have business elsewhere." "Public Street Reed," Crawford said, though he took a step back. "We can stand where we please." "You can," Daniel agreed. "But you won't. Not if you're going to speak disrespectfully about my future wife." "You threatening us?" Tompkins tried to sound tough, but his voice wavered. "I'm informing you," Daniel replied calmly. "Hannah Price will be Hannah Reed in 3 days. Any insult to her is an insult to me and mine. Govern yourselves accordingly." The two men slunk away muttering but defeated. Daniel watched them go, then turned to Hannah with a gentle smile that transformed his stern features. "You didn't need to do that," Hannah said softly. "I've heard worse." "That's exactly why I needed to do it," Daniel replied. "You've endured enough. No more." Mrs. Patterson emerged from the back room, having clearly been eavesdropping. "Good man," she said approvingly. "Now, Mr. Reed, unless you're here to purchase something out with you. It's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding." "That's only on the wedding day itself," Daniel protested. "My shop, my rules. Out." Daniel left with good humor, but not before catching Hannah's hand and pressing a kiss to her palm, a gesture that left her breathless, and Mrs. Patterson tutting about young people and their shameless displays. That evening, Hannah arrived home to find the farmhouse in chaos. Sarah was in tears, Mary was trying to comfort her, and Thomas stood by looking helpless and guilty. "What happened?" Hannah asked immediately, kneeling beside Sarah. "Thomas said maybe you won't want us anymore after you marry Papa." Sarah sobbed. "He said maybe you'll want your own children and forget about us." Hannah's gaze snapped to Thomas, who flushed red. "I didn't mean it like that," he mumbled. "I was just wondering." "Come here, all of you," Hannah said firmly. When they'd gathered around her, she took a deep breath. "I need you to understand something, and I need you to really hear me. You three are not consolation prizes. You're not substitutes for children I might have had. You are the children of my heart, chosen and cherished." "But what if—" Thomas started. "There is no what if," Hannah interrupted. "I cannot have children of my own body. That's simply a fact, like having brown eyes or being right-handed. It doesn't diminish my love for you or make you less mine." "So we're really yours?" Sarah asked, her tears slowing. "You've been mine since the day you sat by my sickbed and told me stories about cloud rabbits," Hannah said, pulling the little girl close. "Mary, you've been mine since you trusted me to help with your first grown-up dress alteration. And Thomas, you've been mine since you stood up to Morrison to protect me. That doesn't mean you're replacing our mother, she continued carefully. Elizabeth will always be your mama. But hearts are miraculous things. They can hold multiple loves without diminishing any of them. I hope you can love me too, not instead of her, but alongside her memory. Mary was crying now, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. Mama would have wanted us to love you, she said. I dream about her sometimes, and she's always smiling when I tell her about you. Thomas cleared his throat roughly. I'm sorry, I get scared sometimes that good things don't last. Hannah understood that fear intimately. They don't always, she admitted. But that's why we have to cherish them while we have them fight for them, protect them. This family, our love for each other, it's worth fighting for. Daniel appeared in the doorway, having obviously heard at least part of the conversation. Everything all right? We're just making sure Hannah knows she's stuck with us. Sarah announced, her usual cheerfulness restored. Forever and ever. That's my plan, Hannah said, meeting Daniel's eyes over the children's heads. The look he gave her was so full of love and gratitude that she had to look away or risk dissolving into tears herself. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparations. The house was scrubbed top to bottom, food was prepared and stored, and what seemed like half the town stopped by with gifts or offers of help. Even some who'd been hostile before brought offerings, a quilted blanket, preserved fruits, hand-carved wooden spoons. It's like they're asking for absolution, Mrs. Thornton observed, cataloging the gifts with her usual efficiency. Maybe they are, Hannah replied, and I'm happy to give it. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting others to die from it. The night before the wedding, tradition dictated that the bride and groom spend the evening apart. Hannah stayed at Mrs. Thornton's house in town, while Daniel remained at the farm with the children. But sleep eluded her, and she found herself sitting at the window, looking toward the farm she couldn't see in the darkness. Can't sleep either. Mrs. Thornton appeared with 2 cups of tea. Too much thinking, Hannah admitted, about how different my life is from what I imagined. When I was young, I dreamed of a grand romance, a house full of my own children, a simple, straightforward happiness. Instead, I got Morrison, barrenness, public humiliation. And then, Mrs. Thornton prompted gently, and then I got Daniel and the children, you this town's eventual acceptance, a love I never dared dream of because I didn't know it could exist. Hannah turned from the window. The path was nothing like I expected, but the destination is better than anything I could have imagined. Your mother would be so proud, Mrs. Thornton said softly. She always said you had steel in your spine. You just needed the right circumstances to reveal it. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of prairie roses. Hannah woke to Sarah's excited voice. The little girl had snuck away from the farm at dawn to be there when Hannah woke up. Papa's already dressed, and he keeps checking his watch, even though the wedding's not for hours, and Thomas had to hide his good boots because he was wearing them to do chores, and Mary's made 3 batches of biscuits because she's too nervous to sit still, and breathe, sweetheart. Hannah laughed, pulling Sarah into a hug. Everything will be perfect. Even if it's not perfect, it'll be ours, Sarah said, with the wisdom children sometimes stumble upon. That's better than perfect. The church was full to overflowing when Hannah arrived in the decorated wagon that served as her carriage. She could see people standing outside, craning for a glimpse, but she only had eyes for the small group at the altar, Daniel in his good suit, looking nervous and handsome and beloved, the children beside him. Thomas standing tall and proud, Mary radiant in her rose-colored dress, Sarah practically vibrating with excitement. Mrs. Thornton, who'd agreed to give Hannah away, squeezed her arm. Ready? I've been ready since the moment he found me by the river, Hannah replied. The walk down the aisle felt both endless and instant. Hannah was aware of faces turning toward her, some smiling, some crying, some watching with the fascination people have for stories of redemption. But all that truly mattered was Daniel's face, the wonder and love in his eyes as he watched her approach. When she reached him, he whispered, "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "You're biased," she whispered back. "Completely," he agreed, "and I plan to stay that way for the next 50 years or so." Reverend Carlton began the ceremony with words about second chances and chosen families, about love that rises from ashes and hope that blooms in unlikely soil. Hannah barely heard him, lost in Daniel's eyes and the small, warm hands of Sarah and Mary, who'd each claimed one of her hands. When it came time for the vows, Daniel spoke first, his voice strong and clear. "Hannah, you came into our lives when we were broken, and somehow, instead of us saving you, you saved us. You showed my children that love isn't limited by blood or birth. You showed me that my heart could heal and grow and love again. I promise to protect you, cherish you, and stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to be your family, your home, and your safe harbor for all the days of my life." Hannah had to swallow twice before she could speak. "Daniel, you gave me sanctuary when the world cast me out. You showed me that my worth wasn't determined by what my body couldn't do, but by what my heart could hold. You and the children didn't just give me a second chance at life. You gave me my first chance at real love. I promise to love your children as my own, to honor Elizabeth's memory while building our own future, and to choose you and this family every single day for the rest of my life." "The rings," Reverend Carlton prompted. Thomas stepped forward with the rings, his face solemn with the importance of his role. They were simple bands. They'd agreed elaborate jewelry didn't suit their prairie life, but Hannah knew Daniel had inscribed something inside hers. She'd see it later in private. "By the power vested in me by God and the state of Kansas, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Daniel, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle, appropriate for public viewing, but Hannah felt the promise in it of deeper intimacies to come. The church erupted in applause, and Sarah's voice rang out clear and delighted. "We're a real family now." "We always were," Daniel said, scooping her up with one arm while keeping the other around Hannah. "Now it's just official." The reception was held in the church hall, with tables groaning under the weight of contributed food. Hannah was touched to see that even families who'd been uncertain about her had contributed. It seemed the whole town wanted to be part of this new beginning. The photographer Mrs. Thornton had hired captured precious moments throughout the day. Daniel and Hannah's first dance. The children clustered around them like eager satellites. Mrs. Thornton wiping away tears she'd deny later, even Mrs. Patterson smiling broadly as she proclaimed the cake she'd secretly baked to be her finest work. During a quiet moment, Hannah found herself standing with Doc Brennan, who'd been watching the proceedings with grandfather-like satisfaction. "I've been doctoring this town for 40 years, he said. "Seen a lot of marriages begin. This one's different." "Different how?" "Most marriages start with illusions that reality slowly strips away. Yours starts with reality, with full knowledge of each other's scars and shortcomings, and builds towards something better. That's rare, Hannah. That's precious." As the sun began to set, Daniel found her in the crowd, pulling her away from well-wishers for a moment alone. "Happy?" he asked. "That word's too small," Hannah replied. "I'm complete. For the first time in my life, I'm complete." "Look," he said, turning her toward where their children were dancing together. Thomas actually letting his sisters stand on his feet as he moved awkwardly to the music. "That's our family." "Our family," Hannah repeated, savoring the words like sweet wine. The evening wound down with traditional send-offs and good wishes, but instead of leaving for a honeymoon impractical with a farm to run and children to raise, the new Reed family returned home together. Mrs. Thornton came too, having become so essential to their household that her absence would have felt wrong. As they pulled up to the farmhouse, Hannah gasped. The entire front porch was decorated with flowers and ribbons, and a new sign hung by the door, "The Reed family, Daniel, Hannah, Mary, Thomas, and Sarah." "When did you do this?" Hannah asked, tears threatening. "We all helped," Mary said proudly. "Mrs. Thornton organized it while we were at the church." "It was Sarah's idea to put all our names," Thomas added. "She said it was important." "Because we're all Reeds now," Sarah explained with 5-year-old certainty. "All of us together." That night, after the children were asleep and Mrs. Thornton had retired to her room, Daniel and Hannah finally had a moment truly alone. She'd worried this might be awkward. She'd been married before, but that had been nothing like this. With Morrison, the marriage bed had been a battlefield. With Daniel, she discovered it could be a sanctuary. "We can take this as slowly as you need," Daniel said, ever considerate. "I've been going slow my whole life," Hannah replied, surprised by her own boldness. "I'm ready to live fully." Later, lying in Daniel's arms in the bed they now shared, Hannah finally looked at the inscription in her wedding ring. In Daniel's careful script, it read, "Chosen and cherished." "It's perfect," she whispered against his chest. "You're perfect," he replied. "I'm scarred and barren and probably too outspoken for a proper farmer's wife." "You're perfect," he repeated firmly. "Perfect for us, perfect for this life we're building. Don't ever doubt that." The weeks following the wedding fell into new rhythms. Hannah moved her things into Daniel's room, now their room. The children adjusted quickly, with Sarah especially delighting in calling Hannah Mama at every opportunity. Even Thomas, trying so hard to be grown up, occasionally slipped and called her Ma, then blushed furiously. The farm prospered with the additional investment from Hannah's inheritance. They purchased new equipment, expanded their crops, and even hired 2 local boys to help with the increased workload. The shop in town continued to thrive as well, with Mrs. Patterson gradually giving Hannah more responsibility. "I'm thinking of retiring," the older woman announced one day about a month after the wedding. "These old bones aren't what they used to be. How would you feel about taking over the shop?" Hannah nearly dropped the dress she was working on. "I couldn't afford." "I'm not talking about selling. I'm talking about a partnership. You run it, we split the profits, and eventually it becomes yours entirely. Consider it my wedding gift delayed." It was an incredible opportunity, one that would ensure the family's financial security regardless of farm yields. Daniel was supportive when she discussed it with him that evening. "You love that work," he said simply, "and you're good at it. We'll make it work with the family schedule." But not everyone was pleased with the Reed family's prosperity. Word came that Morrison had returned to town not to stay, but passing through on his way further west. He'd been drinking heavily at the saloon, making threats and proclamations about the injustice done to him. Hannah was at the shop when he appeared in the doorway, swaying slightly, but not as drunk as she'd expected. "Hello, Hannah," he said, and for a moment she saw a flash of the charming man who'd courted her all those years ago. "Samuel, che," she replied carefully. "I heard you were passing through. Came to see if it was true. You married to Reed. You playing mother to his brats." "They're my children now," Hannah said firmly. "And yes, Daniel and I are married." Morrison laughed bitterly. "Children. You couldn't give me even one, but you're mothering his 3. I couldn't give you children because my body doesn't work that way. It had nothing to do with my worth as a woman or wife. You never understood that." "I understand plenty," Morrison snarled, the mask of civility slipping. "I understand you humiliated me, turned the whole town against me. You did that yourself," Hannah interrupted. "With your cruelty, your violence, your inability to see me as anything more than a vessel for your legacy. I loved you. You loved the idea of me. When I couldn't fulfill that idea, you tried to destroy me." Hannah stood facing him squarely. "But I survived. More than survived, I've thrived. I have love, family, purpose. Everything you tried to take from me has been returned tenfold." Morrison's face contorted with rage, and for a moment Hannah thought he might strike her. Then Daniel appeared in the doorway behind him, Thomas at his side. "Problem here?" Daniel asked mildly, though his hand rested on the gun at his hip. Morrison looked between them. Hannah standing tall and unafraid. Daniel ready to protect, but letting her handle her own battle. Thomas glaring with adolescent fury, and something seemed to break in him. "No," he said quietly. "No problem. I'm leaving town within the hour." He turned to go, then paused. "Were you ever happy with me, even in the beginning?" Hannah considered lying, offering him that comfort, but he'd had enough of her truth to deserve this last piece. "No, I was young and scared and thought marriage to you meant safety. I mistook possession for protection. I know better now." Morrison left without another word. They never saw him again, though years later word would come that he died in California alone and unmourned, still chasing gold that didn't exist. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Hannah told them about Morrison's visit. "He seemed diminished," she said thoughtfully, like all the anger and hatred had eaten him from the inside. "Good," Thomas said flatly. "No," Hannah corrected gently. Not good. Sad. He could have chosen differently at any point. He could have been kind, could have found real love, could have built something beautiful. Instead, he chose bitterness and died alone. That's not something to celebrate, it's something to learn from. What's the lesson? Sarah asked. That love is a choice we make every day, Daniel said, reaching for Hannah's hand, and that choosing cruelty leaves you empty while choosing kindness fills you up. Summer arrived with its usual intensity, bringing both blessings and challenges. The crops were abundant, promising a good harvest. The shop was busier than ever, with orders coming from neighboring towns as Hannah's reputation spread. The children thrived. Mary was becoming an accomplished young woman. Thomas was growing into his father's steady strength, and Sarah remained a delightful whirlwind of energy and affection. But Hannah couldn't shake a growing fatigue, a persistent nausea that came in waves. She attributed it to the heat, to working too hard, to anything but what a small, impossible voice in her head whispered. It was Mrs. Thornton who finally voiced the suspicion. "You're pregnant," she said bluntly one morning after Hannah had rushed outside to be sick. "That's impossible," Hannah said automatically. "The doctor said Morrison always said I'm barren." "Doctors can be wrong." Morrison was definitely wrong about most things. "When was your last monthly—" Hannah tried to remember and couldn't. The chaos of the wedding, the busy season at the shop, but it had been at least 2 months, maybe 3. "It's impossible," she repeated, but her hand went to her stomach unconsciously. Doc Brennan confirmed it a week later, his examination thorough and gentle. "About 3 months along, I'd say. Everything seems healthy." Hannah sat in stunned silence while Daniel gripped her hand so tightly it hurt. "But I'm barren," she whispered. "You were never barren," Doc Brennan said firmly. "I've seen this before. Sometimes when a woman is under extreme stress, when she's unhappy or frightened, her body simply won't conceive. It's like it knows it's not safe to bring a child into that situation. But now, feeling secure and loved, nature took its course." "So it was never me," Hannah said wonderingly. "All those years, all that blame." "It was never you," Doc Brennan confirmed. "Morrison created an environment where your body couldn't do what it might have done naturally in better circumstances." Daniel hadn't spoken since the confirmation. Now he pulled Hannah into his arms, and she felt him shaking. "Daniel, I thought I'd lost the chance to see you as a mother to a baby," he said roughly. "I'd made my peace with it truly. The children we have are enough, more than enough. But this? Hannah, this is a miracle." They told the children that evening, unsure how they'd react. Would they feel replaced, jealous? Sarah shrieked with delight and immediately began planning all the things she'd teach a little sister. Thomas grinned and said he supposed one more kid wouldn't be too much trouble. But it was Mary's reaction that broke Hannah's heart in the best way. "Mama would be so happy," she said softly. "She always said babies were proof that God believes in tomorrow. She'd be so happy for you, for all of us." As her pregnancy progressed, the town's reaction was mixed, but primarily positive. Those who'd stood by them celebrated. Those who'd been uncertain saw it as vindication of the marriage. But there were always whisper suggestions that perhaps the baby wasn't Daniel's, that Hannah had never been barren at all, but had been unfaithful to Morrison. These whispers reached a peak when Hannah was about 6 months along. She was at the shop working on a christening gown, possibly for her own baby, when a group of women entered, led by Jack Crawford's wife, Martha. "So it's true," Martha said coldly, eyeing Hannah's obvious pregnancy. "The barren woman miraculously conceived." "Miracles do happen," Mrs. Patterson interjected sharply from behind the counter. "Or lies are revealed," Martha countered. How convenient that she couldn't give Morrison children but fell pregnant immediately with Reed. Hannah stood slowly, her hand protective over her belly. "What exactly are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating outright that you were never barren. You withheld children from your lawful husband and gave them instead to—" The slap came from an unexpected source, quiet, gentle Mary Reed, who'd entered the shop unnoticed. "How dare you?" Mary said, her young voice carrying adult authority. "How dare you come here and spread your poison?" Hannah couldn't have children with Morrison because he was a monster who terrorized her daily. Her body knew what her mind couldn't admit, that he was unsafe, that any child would be in danger. With my father, she's safe and loved, and her body knows that too. You little... I'd choose your next words very carefully, Thomas said from the doorway, Daniel beside him. That's my sister and my mother you're talking to. The women fled, but the damage was done. The old doubts resurfaced in Hannah's mind, the voice that said she didn't deserve this happiness, this miracle. That night, she voiced her fears to Daniel. What if something's wrong with the baby? What if I lose it? What if everything's perfect? Daniel countered. What if you carry this baby to term and deliver safely? What if we get to raise another child together, one who has your eyes and my stubbornness? I'm scared, Hannah admitted. So am I, Daniel confessed. I'm terrified, but I'm also hopeful and grateful, and so in love with you and this baby that I can barely breathe sometimes. The final months of pregnancy were both challenging and beautiful. Hannah had to reduce her hours at the shop as her body grew heavy and tired. But the children rallied around her, Sarah singing to the baby every night, Thomas building a beautiful cradle in the barn, Mary sewing tiny clothes with exquisite care. Mrs. Thornton, who'd extended her stay indefinitely, proved invaluable. I helped deliver my sister's children, she revealed. Before she ran away with your father, I know what to do. Winter came early that year, and Hannah's labor began during the first real snowstorm of the season. It started slowly, just twinges that she ignored while helping with dinner. But by nightfall, there was no denying what was happening. It's too early, she gasped between contractions. Still 2 weeks. Babies come when they're ready, Mrs. Thornton said calmly. Daniel ride for Doc Brennan. Children, I need hot water and clean linens. Everyone scattered to their tasks except Daniel, who seemed frozen. Daniel, go, Hannah urged. I'll be fine. I can't leave you. You can and you will. Our baby needs Doc Brennan. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and effort, encouragement and fear. Doc Brennan arrived just as the contractions reached their peak, snow-covered and cheerful. Couldn't wait for better weather, could you? He asked Hannah. Always have to be dramatic. Hannah wanted to laugh, but could only groan as another contraction seized her. You're doing beautifully, Doc Brennan assured her after an examination. The baby's in perfect position, just needs you to do the hard work now. The hard work seemed endless. Hannah had witnessed animal births on the farm, but nothing had prepared her for this intensity, this feeling of being split apart and reformed. I can't, she gasped at one point. You can, Daniel said firmly, gripping her hand. You're the strongest person I know. You survived Morrison. You survived those lashes. You survived being cast out. You can do this. We're all here, Mary added from the doorway where the children had gathered despite being told to stay away. We love you, Mama Hannah. Something about hearing Mary call her Mama gave Hannah the strength for one final push. And then cutting through the storm's howl came a different sound, the cry of a newborn baby. It's a boy, Doc Brennan announced, quickly cleaning and wrapping the infant. A healthy, perfect boy. Hannah reached for her son with trembling arms, and when Doc Brennan placed him on her chest, the world stopped. He was small but strong, with a shock of dark hair like Daniel's, and when he opened them briefly, eyes that promised to be hazel like Hannah's. He's real, she whispered in wonder. He's really here. Daniel was crying openly, not caring who saw. He's beautiful. You're beautiful. Hannah, this is everything. The children crept closer, drawn by the miracle. He's so tiny, Sarah breathed. Can I touch him? Gently, Hannah said, guiding Sarah's small hand to the baby's head. What will you name him? Thomas asked, trying to sound casual but clearly fascinated. Hannah and Daniel looked at each other. They'd discussed names but hadn't decided. Samuel, Hannah said suddenly, and everyone froze. Not for Morrison, she quickly clarified, but to redeem the name, to show that something good can come from something painful. Samuel means God is heard, and I was heard. My prayers, my pain, my hope, all of it was heard. Samuel Reed, Daniel said, testing it. Sam Reed, I like it. Can we call him Sammy? Sarah asked. When he's little, Hannah agreed, touching her son's perfect cheek. When he's little, he can be Sammy. As the storm raged outside, the Reed family huddled together in the warm bedroom, marveling at their newest member, Mrs. Thornton efficiently handled the practical aftermath of birth, while Doc Brennan proclaimed mother and baby in perfect health. "Never really barren," he said again loud enough for everyone to hear. "Just needed the right circumstances. This boy is proof of that." Later, when the house had quieted and the children had reluctantly gone to bed, Hannah lay with her son at her breast and her husband beside her, feeling the kind of contentment she'd never imagined possible. "Do you think Morrison knows?" she asked quietly. "Wherever he is, do you think he knows that it was never me?" "I hope so," Daniel said. "I hope he knows and regrets every cruel word, every lash, every moment of pain he caused you." "I don't need his regret anymore," Hannah realized. "I have this, our family, our son, our life. That's enough. More than enough." The baby stirred, making small sounds that were already precious. Hannah adjusted him, marveling at the instincts she'd thought she'd never need. "Thank you," she told Daniel, "for saving me that day by the river, for seeing me as more than damaged goods, for giving me the safety to bloom." "Thank you," Daniel countered, "for saving us right back, for showing my children that families can be chosen and created in all sorts of ways, for proving that love really can heal almost anything." As dawn broke, the storm had passed, leaving the world crystalline and new. Sarah crept in early, unable to stay away from the baby any longer. "The snow makes everything look different," she observed, peering out the window. "Clean and bright and full of possibility." "That's what Sammy is," Hannah said, inviting Sarah to climb carefully onto the bed. "Our fresh start, our new possibility." "We already had a fresh start," Sarah said wisely, "when you came to us. Sammy he's proof that fresh starts work." From the mouths of babes, Hannah thought, kissing Sarah's head while cradling her newborn son. The woman who'd been whipped for barrenness now held the living proof of her fertility. But more importantly, she held proof that love, real love, could work miracles that no amount of cruelty could prevent. The first weeks with baby Samuel passed in a blur of feeding and sleeping, of marveling at tiny fingers and toes, of watching the older children adapt to their new roles. Thomas had appointed himself the baby's protector, checking the locks each night and standing watch at the window whenever strangers approached the farm. Mary became Hannah's right hand, anticipating needs before they were voiced. While Sarah entertained the baby with songs and stories, he was far too young to understand but seemed to enjoy nonetheless. "He smiled at me," Sarah announced one morning about 6 weeks after the birth. "A real smile, not just gas like Mrs. Thornton says." Hannah looked up from where she was nursing Samuel, exhausted but happy. The recovery had been harder than she'd expected, her body taking time to heal from the ordeal of birth, but each day brought new strength. "Babies that young don't really smile," Mrs. Thornton said automatically, then softened at Sarah's crestfallen expression. "But perhaps Samuel is exceptional. He certainly seems to be in every other way." The shop had been patient during Hannah's recovery, with Mrs. Patterson handling things alone despite her arthritis. But as spring approached, Hannah knew she needed to return to work. The farm was doing well, but the shop income had become essential to their plans for the children's education. "I could watch him," Mary offered when Hannah expressed her concerns about leaving Samuel. "I'm old enough, and I helped with Sarah when she was small." "You have your own schooling to think about," Hannah reminded her. "You're too bright to sacrifice your education for household duties." "Then what?" Daniel asked, bouncing Samuel gently as the baby fussed. "We could hire someone." "Actually," Mrs. Thornton interrupted, "I have a proposal." They all turned to her expectantly. Over the months, she'd have become such an integral part of their household that they sometimes forgot she had a life and wealth beyond their farm. "I'm 73 years old," she began. "I have more money than I can spend, no children of my own, and I've found more happiness in this cramped farmhouse than I ever did in my Chicago mansion. Let me watch Samuel while Hannah works. Let me be the grandmother these children deserve." "Aunt Adelaide?" Hannah began, tears in her eyes. "I know I'm not really their grandmother," Mrs. Thornton continued, "but blood doesn't make family, as we've all learned. I want to be part of this family's future, not just a visitor passing through." "You already are family," Daniel said firmly. "You have been since you stood by Hannah when she needed it most." "Then it's settled," Mrs. Thornton said briskly, though Hannah could see tears threatening behind her stern facade. "I'll watch Samuel, and Hannah can return to the shop without worry." The arrangement worked beautifully. Hannah would nurse Samuel in the morning, go to the shop, return at noon to nurse again, then work until evening. Mrs. Thornton proved to be a devoted caregiver, and Samuel thrived under the attention of his many guardians. But peace never lasted long in their hard-won paradise. When Samuel was 4 months old, a letter arrived that chilled Hannah to her core. It was from Morrison's lawyer in California, informing them that Morrison had died, but not before filing one last legal challenge. He claimed that any children born to Hannah within a year of their divorce should be considered his, as they must have been conceived during the marriage. "It's absurd," Daniel said, crumpling the letter in fury. The divorce was finalized over a year ago. Samuel was born 10 months after, but conceived 9 months after. Hannah said quietly, doing the terrible math. Close enough that Morrison's claim might be heard, especially if he found a sympathetic judge. "He's dead," Thomas pointed out with teenage practicality. "How can a dead man claim a child?" "His estate can," Mrs. Thornton said grimly. "If he had debts, creditors might see a baby as an asset to be sold or bound into servitude. It's happened before." The thought of anyone trying to take Samuel sent ice through Hannah's veins. She clutched her son tighter, and he gurgled happily, unaware of the threat hanging over his small head. "We'll fight," Daniel said simply. "Whatever it takes." The legal battle that followed tested their resources and resolve. Mrs. Thornton's Chicago lawyers proved invaluable, but Morrison had been clever in death as he'd been cruel in life. He'd filed the claim in multiple jurisdictions, forcing them to fight on several fronts. The town rallied around them in unexpected ways. Even those who'd been hostile before seemed offended by this attack on a baby. A fund was started to help with legal costs, though the Reeds tried to refuse it. "This is our fight too," Reverend Carlton said firmly. "An attack on one family is an attack on the very idea of family. Morrison's trying to reach from beyond the grave to destroy what you've built. We won't let that happen." The first hearing was held in the county seat with Judge Harrison presiding. Hannah had to testify about the intimate details of her marriage to Morrison, confirming that there had been no marital relations in the months before the separation. "He hadn't touched me in over 6 months before that day by the river," she said clearly, though her cheeks burned with shame at having to speak such private matters aloud. "He said I disgusted him, that touching a barren woman was like touching death itself. And yet you conceived shortly after marrying Mr. Reed." Morrison's lawyer, a sharp-faced man from San Francisco, pressed. "How do we know the child wasn't conceived before the divorce?" "Because I was beaten nearly to death and recovering for weeks," Hannah replied steadily. "Ask Doc Brennan about the extent of my injuries. Ask anyone who saw me in those weeks after. I could barely walk, much less engage in marital activities." Doc Brennan's testimony was decisive. He described in clinical detail the severity of Hannah's injuries, the time required for healing, the impossibility of conception during that period. Furthermore, he added, his old voice carrying absolute authority, "I examined Mrs. Morrison as she was then multiple times during her marriage. There was never any indication of pregnancy. The child was conceived after her marriage to Mr. Reed, of that I am certain." The judge ruled in their favor, but Morrison's estate immediately appealed. The stress began to show on the family. Daniel grew gaunt from worry, Hannah barely slept, and even the children felt the strain. It was Sarah who broke one evening, sobbing into her dinner plate. "What if they take Sammy? What if we never see him again?" "That won't happen," Hannah said firmly, though her own heart was full of the same fear. "How do you know?" Sarah demanded. "Bad things happen all the time. Mama died, you got hurt, the barn burned. How do you know this won't be another bad thing?" Hannah looked at her family. Daniel's jaw set with determination. Thomas's fists clenched, ready to fight Mary, holding Sarah's hand. Mrs. Thornton sitting straight-backed and immovable, and baby Samuel sleeping peacefully in his cradle, unaware of the storm swirling around him. "Because we won't let it happen," Hannah said. "Because sometimes when you fight hard enough and love fiercely enough, you win. We've already won so much, we found each other. We built this family, we've survived everything thrown at us. We'll survive this too." The second hearing was scheduled for the state capitol, requiring a long journey. Hannah was reluctant to take Samuel, but the judge insisted the child in question must be present. They made the trip as a family, even Mrs. Thornton enduring the difficult journey to show support. The state courthouse was intimidating, all marble and mahogany designed to make ordinary people feel small. But Hannah refused to be diminished. She wore her best dress, one she'd made herself with fabric Mrs. Thornton had given her, and carried Samuel with his head high. Morrison's lawyer had brought new tactics this time, including witnesses who claimed to have seen Hannah in compromising situations during her marriage. Lies, Hannah said flatly when asked about the allegations. Ask these witnesses for specifics, dates, times, places. They can't provide them because they're lying. One by one, the witnesses crumbled under cross-examination. It became clear they had been paid or promised payment for Morrison's estate. The judge grew increasingly irritated with the waste of the court's time. But then Morrison's lawyer played what he clearly thought was his winning card. Your Honor, I have here a letter written by Samuel Morrison shortly before his death, swearing that he and his wife had relations the night before she left him. Hannah gasped. It was a lie, but how could she prove it? Daniel stood suddenly. Your Honor, I request permission to speak. The judge nodded. The night before Hannah was whipped and left for dead, I was in town. I saw Morrison at the saloon drunk and boasting about how he was going to teach his barren wife a lesson the next day. He was there until nearly dawn. Multiple witnesses can confirm this. He couldn't have been with Hannah because he was passed out in the saloon's back room. I know because I had to step over him to leave. Can you produce these witnesses? The judge asked. I can, Reverend Carlton said, standing in the gallery, because I was one of them. I was there trying to talk Morrison out of his planned cruelty. I failed, but I can confirm he never went home that night. Others stood the saloon keeper, 2 farmers, even Jack Crawford reluctantly admitted he'd been there and could confirm Daniel's account. The judge looked disgusted. This case is built on lies and vindictiveness from beyond the grave. I'm ruling in favor of the Reed family and ordering Morrison's estate to pay all legal costs. Furthermore, any additional attempts to challenge Samuel Reed's parentage will be considered harassment and dealt with accordingly. The relief was overwhelming. Hannah collapsed against Daniel, clutching Samuel as tears streamed down her face. They'd won. Their son was safe. The journey home was triumphant. Word had already reached their town, and people lined the streets to welcome them back. Even former detractors offered congratulations, seemingly unified by their opposition to Morrison's posthumous cruelty. That night, as the family celebrated with a special dinner, Mrs. Thornton insisted on preparing herself with mixed results. Cooking had never been her strength. Hannah found herself standing on the porch with Samuel in her arms, looking out over their land. Daniel joined her, wrapping his arms around them both. It's over, he said. Morrison can't hurt us anymore, not even from the grave. His hatred almost won, Hannah said quietly. Even dead, he almost destroyed our happiness. But he didn't. Love won. Our family won. Daniel kissed her temple. You won. As summer progressed, life settled into peaceful rhythms. The crops flourished, the shop thrived, and Samuel grew fat and happy, adored by his siblings and spoiled by Mrs. Thornton. Hannah had worried the older children might resent the attention the baby received, but they seemed to view him as a shared treasure proof of their family's resilience. The photograph from Hannah and Daniel's wedding had been framed and hung in the parlor, but now Mrs. Thornton insisted on a new family portrait, one that included Samuel. Families change and grow, she said. We need to document all of it. The photographer arrived on a perfect August day. They arranged themselves on the porch again. Daniel and Hannah seated with Samuel in Hannah's arms, Mary and Thomas standing behind them. Sarah perched on the arm of Daniel's chair, and Mrs. Thornton seated regally beside Hannah. Everyone smile, the photographer instructed, disappearing under his black cloth. We don't need to be told, Sarah announced. We're always smiling now. It was an exaggeration, but not by much. The farm had never been more productive. The children were thriving in school, and Hannah had officially taken over the shop as Mrs. Patterson finally retired. They'd even been able to hire a young woman who'd recently lost her husband, giving her the same chance at redemption that Hannah had received. You've gotten soft, Mrs. Patterson teased when she heard. Taking in strays. I learned from the best, Hannah replied, thinking of Daniel finding her by the river of this whole town, slowly choosing compassion over cruelty. Samuel's first birthday approached with much fanfare. The entire town seemed to want to celebrate this child who'd become a symbol of triumph over adversity. Hannah was overwhelmed by the gifts that arrived: hand-carved toys, knitted blankets, enough preserved food to last through winter. They're not just celebrating Samuel, Daniel observed. They're celebrating what his existence means, that Morrison was wrong. That cruelty doesn't win, that life finds a way. The birthday celebration was held on a perfect September day, the same kind of crisp, clear weather that had marked Hannah's arrival at the Reed farm 2 years earlier. It seemed impossible that so much had changed in such a short time. Samuel, now walking unsteadily and babbling constantly, was delighted by the attention. He toddled from person to person, offering his new favorite word, up, until someone would lift him, then immediately demanding down to continue his explorations. He's going to be a handful, Reverend Carlton observed, watching Samuel attempt to climb onto a table. He already is, Hannah laughed, rescuing her son from his latest adventure. But the best kind of handful. During the party, an unexpected guest arrived, Judge Harrison from the county seat, carrying an official-looking document. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, "but I have news I thought you'd want to hear immediately." The party quieted, everyone sensing the importance of the moment. "Morrison's estate has been fully settled," the judge announced. "All debts paid, all claims resolved. But there was a surprise: he'd never changed his will from early in your marriage, Hannah. Despite the divorce, despite everything, you're still named as his beneficiary." Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. "I don't want his money, tut." "It's not much," the judge continued. "After debts and legal fees, just a few $100s. But there's also the land, the property you shared during your marriage. It's yours if you want it." The irony was overwhelming. The man who tried to destroy her had inadvertently left her the means to further secure her family's future. "We'll sell it," Daniel said immediately. "Use the money for the children's education." "Actually," Hannah said slowly, "an idea forming. What if we didn't sell it? What if we used it?" Everyone looked at her curiously. "There are other women like I was," Hannah explained, "trapped in cruel marriages, hurt and hopeless. What if we turned that property into a refuge, a place where women could go to escape, to heal, to figure out their next steps?" "A sanctuary," Mary breathed, understanding immediately. "Run by someone who understands," Mrs. Thornton added, nodding approvingly. The idea took root quickly. Within weeks, plans were drawn up to convert Morrison's former house into a haven for women in crisis. The town, perhaps still seeking absolution for their complicity in Hannah's suffering, donated generously. Even Martha Crawford, Jack's wife, who'd been so cruel during Hannah's pregnancy, came forward with a substantial donation and a tearful apology. "I was wrong," she said simply, "about everything. Let me help make it right." The Hannah House, as it came to be known, opened 6 months later. The first resident was a young woman from a neighboring county, bearing bruises that reminded Hannah painfully of her own past. Hannah sat with her that first night, holding her hand as she cried. "It gets better," Hannah promised. "I'm living proof of that." As the seasons turned and Samuel grew from baby to toddler, the rhythm of their expanded family settled into comfortable patterns. Thomas, now 17, had begun courting the doctor's daughter, much to Sarah's delight and teasing. Mary, at 15, showed a remarkable aptitude for mathematics and spoke of attending college, a dream Mrs. Thornton was determined to make reality with her connections and resources. Sarah, 11, now had declared her intention to be a writer, filling journal after journal with stories that often featured brave women overcoming terrible odds. "Based on true events," she would say, importantly, making Hannah laugh and cry in equal measure. And Samuel, walking confidently now, talking in full sentences that delighted everyone, was simply and purely himself a happy child who knew nothing but love and security. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Mrs. Thornton made an announcement. "I've been thinking about my will," she said, causing immediate protests about such morbid talk. "Hush, all of you. I'm old, not immortal. I want you to know that everything I have will be divided among the children, all 4 of them, with funds set aside for the Hannah House and provisions for you, Hannah and Daniel, to manage it all until they're of age." "Aunt Adelaide," Hannah began. "It's decided," Mrs. Thornton said firmly. "You gave me a family in my final years. Let me ensure that family's security for generations to come." "We don't need," Daniel started. "Of course you don't need it," Mrs. Thornton interrupted. "That's precisely why I want to give it. You've never wanted anything from me but my presence, my participation in this beautiful, chaotic life you've built. That's worth more than all the money in Chicago." That night after the children were asleep, Hannah and Daniel stood on their porch, the same porch where he'd first offered her sanctuary, where they'd been married, where their family portraits had been taken. "Did you ever imagine this?" Daniel asked. "When you were lying by that river, could you have imagined this life?" "Never," Hannah admitted. "I thought my story was ending. I never dreamed it was actually beginning." And now, Hannah thought of all they'd built: the thriving farm, the successful shop, the Hannah house, offering hope to other women, their 4 children growing strong and confident, Mrs. Thornton finding joy in her twilight years. Most of all, she thought of the love that bound them all, stronger than blood, deeper than law, more enduring than any cruelty the world could devise. "Now I know that the best revenge against those who try to break us is to thrive," she said. "To love fiercely, to choose joy, to build something beautiful from the ashes of what they destroyed." Samuel's cry interrupted their contemplation. He'd had a nightmare and wanted comfort. Hannah went to him, gathering her youngest into her arms, soothing him with the same lullabies she'd learned from Mary, who'd learned them from Elizabeth. As she rocked Samuel back to sleep, Hannah felt the presence of all the women who'd come before her mother, who'd chosen love over wealth. Elizabeth, who'd created this family's foundation, Mrs. Thornton, who'd searched until she found them, even the women now finding shelter at the Hannah house. They were all part of this story. This proof that love could triumph over hate, that chosen families were as real as any other, that a woman's worth had nothing to do with her womb and everything to do with her heart. The sound of footsteps made her look up. The entire family had gathered: Daniel, Mary, Thomas, Sarah, even Mrs. Thornton in her nightgown. They'd all heard Samuel's cry and come to help. "We're here," Sarah said unnecessarily, but sweetly. "We're all here." And they were. Against all odds, despite everything that had tried to tear them apart, they were there together, whole and home. The autumn harvest that year was the best they'd ever had. The wheat stood tall and golden, the corn grew heavy on the stalks, and the vegetable garden Mary tended produced enough to feed them through winter with plenty to share. As the family worked together to bring in the crops, Hannah couldn't help but reflect on the metaphorical harvest of their lives. How the seeds of kindness Daniel had planted when he rescued her had grown into this abundant life. Thomas had grown into a young man any parent would be proud of, his early resentment of Hannah long forgotten. He'd inherited his father's steady strength and his mother's intellectual curiosity, and when he spoke of his plans to study agriculture at the state college, Hannah felt the same maternal pride she felt for all her children. "You'll make the farm even better than we ever could," Daniel told him one evening as they repaired the fence together. "I'll make it different," Thomas corrected. "You and Mama Hannah made it better than it was. You made it a home." The casual use of Mama Hannah made her heart swell. He'd been calling her that for months now, the qualifier of Hannah, distinguishing her from his birth mother while still acknowledging her maternal role. Mary's acceptance to a women's college in Boston. Mrs. Thornton's alma mater had been cause for celebration and tears in equal measure. The thought of her leaving made Hannah's chest tight, but the joy of seeing this brilliant young woman spread her wings overshadowed the impending sadness. "I'll write every week," Mary promised, helping Hannah in the shop one afternoon. "And I'll come home for holidays. This will always be home." "I know," Hannah said, though she had to turn away to hide her tears. "Your mother would be so proud of you." "Both of them are," Mary said firmly, and Hannah couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Sarah had started a newspaper for the school, filling it with stories and observations that showed a wit beyond her years. Her latest editorial about the importance of the Hannah house had actually been reprinted in the county paper, making her briefly famous in their small corner of Kansas. "I'm going to be a real journalist," she declared at dinner. "I'll travel the world and tell important stories." "What about getting married?" Thomas teased. Sarah fixed him with a look that was pure Mrs. Thornton. "I can do both, or neither, or whatever I choose." Mama Hannah taught me that women have options. And Samuel, now 2 years old, with Daniel's steady temperament and Hannah's hazel eyes, was the joy that bound them all together. He called Mrs. Thornton Gamma, which she pretended to merely tolerate but secretly adored. He followed Thomas around like a shadow, tried to copy everything Mary did, and treated Sarah as his personal entertainer. But it was the way he said Mama and Papa with such complete certainty and love that never failed to move Hannah to tears. This child, who might never have existed if Morrison had had his way, was proof that sometimes the universe rights its own wrongs. The Hannah house had grown beyond their initial expectations. They now housed 3 women and their children, providing not just shelter, but job training and childcare. Hannah spent 2 days a week there teaching sewing skills and offering the kind of understanding that only came from shared experience. One resident, a young woman named Catherine, who'd fled a violent marriage, pulled Hannah aside one day. "They say you were whipped, 100 lashes. Is it true?" Hannah nodded, not elaborating. "How did you survive? Not just physically, but how did you learn to trust again, to love again?" Hannah thought carefully before answering. "I almost didn't. But Daniel and his family showed me that not all love comes with conditions or cruelty. They gave me space to heal and time to trust. And when I was ready, they were still there, steady as the sunrise." "Will I ever be ready?" Catherine asked, her voice small. "You're here," Hannah pointed out. "You left, you sought help. You're already braver than you know. Ready will come when it comes. For now, just focus on safe." That evening, Hannah found Daniel in the barn checking on a sick calf. It was such a familiar scene. How many times had she found him here over the years, tending to animals with the same gentle patience he showed their children? "Catherine asked me about the lashes today," she said, settling beside him on a hay bale. Daniel's jaw tightened the way it always did when her past suffering was mentioned. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That surviving was just the first step. That learning to live again took longer but was worth every difficult moment." Daniel pulled her close and she rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it? The path that brought you here? How can I regret something that gave me you the children?" "This life?" Hannah asked. "The pain was real, the scars are permanent, but they're part of my story. And I like how my story turned out." "It's not over yet," Daniel reminded her. "We've got years ahead of us. Grandchildren, maybe. The farm to pass on. The Hannah house to expand. So much life still to live." Hannah smiled at the thought. "Remember when you found me by the river? Did you imagine any of this?" "I imagined getting you somewhere safe," Daniel said. "Everything else falling in love with you, you saving my children's hearts. Samuel, all of it that was beyond my imagination." A sound from the house made them both look up. Mrs. Thornton was calling them for dinner, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. At 75, she was frailer than when she'd first arrived, but her spirit remained indomitable. "We should go in," Hannah said, "before she comes looking for us." "In a moment," Daniel said, pulling her closer. "I want to remember this sitting in the barn where I first brought you, thinking about how far we've come." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their farm chickens settling for the night, the calves labored but steadying breathing the wind through the prairie grass. From the house came laughter, probably Sarah telling one of her stories. "Daniel," Hannah said. Thank you for seeing me as worth saving." "Hannah Reed," he said, using her married name deliberately. "You saved yourself. I just gave you a place to do it." They walked back to the house, hand in hand, toward the warm light spilling from the windows, toward their children's laughter, toward Mrs. Thornton's fond scolding about letting dinner get cold, toward home. That night, as Hannah tucked Samuel into bed, he grabbed her hand with his small, perfect fingers. "Love you, Mama," he said sleepily. "Love you too, my miracle boy," she whispered, smoothing his dark hair. She made her rounds, checking on Sarah, who was writing in her journal by candlelight, discussing college preparations with Mary, listening to Thomas talk about his plans for crop rotation next year. Mrs. Thornton had already retired, but Hannah stopped to ensure she had her nightly medicine and extra blankets against the cooling nights. Finally, she returned to the room she shared with Daniel, finding him already in bed, reading by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, his face softening with the same love that had carried her through the darkest moments and into this blessed life. "All well?" he asked. "All perfect," she corrected, joining him in bed. As they lay together in the darkness, Hannah thought about the circular nature of their story. Morrison had tried to destroy her for being barren, but she'd proven fertile. He tried to make her worthless, but she'd become invaluable to so many. He tried to isolate her, but she'd found a love larger than anything she'd imagined. The scars on her back had faded to thin white lines, barely visible unless you knew to look for them. Sometimes months passed without her thinking of them at all. They were history written on her skin, but they didn't define her present or determine her future. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, sensing her wakeful mind. "Forgiveness," Hannah said after a moment. "How I spent so long thinking I needed Morrison's apology, his acknowledgement that he was wrong. But real forgiveness wasn't about him at all. It was about me choosing to let go of the poison, to stop letting his cruelty determine my capacity for joy." "You're the strongest person I know," Daniel said softly. "No," Hannah corrected. "I'm just someone who learned that broken things can be mended, that families can be chosen, that love is the most powerful force in the universe. Anyone can learn those lessons. I was just lucky enough to have teachers like you and the children." As sleep finally claimed her, Hannah's last thought was a prayer of gratitude for Daniel's courage in saving her, for the children's open hearts, for Mrs. Thornton's fierce loyalty, for the town's eventual acceptance for Samuel's existence, for the women finding hope at the Hannah house, for every single moment that had brought her from that riverside to this bed, from that despair to this contentment, from that ending to this beginning that seemed to stretch endlessly forward, full of promise and possibility and love. The morning of Mary's departure for college arrived with unseasonable rain, as if the sky itself was weeping at the impending separation. Hannah stood in the doorway of Mary's room, watching her pack the last of her belongings into the trunk. Mrs. Thornton had purchased a beautiful leather piece that spoke of new beginnings and distant horizons. "You don't have to hover, Mama Hannah," Mary said softly, folding a shawl Hannah had made for her. "I'm not disappearing forever." "I know," Hannah replied, though her heart felt otherwise. "It's just, you were the first one to accept me. That first day when you changed my bandages and told me about your mother, you gave me hope when I had none." Mary crossed the room and embraced her tightly. "You gave us our father back. After Mama died, he was just going through the motions. You brought him back to life, brought us all back to life." Thomas appeared in the doorway, trying to look nonchalant despite his red-rimmed eyes. "Coach is here," he announced gruffly. "Best get moving if you want to make the train." The entire family gathered at the station, even Mrs. Thornton, though the journey from the farm had clearly taxed her increasingly frail body. Samuel, now 3, didn't fully understand what was happening, but sensed the emotion and clung to Hannah's skirts. "Why Mary go?" he asked plaintively. "To learn wonderful things," Hannah told him, lifting him to her hip, "so she can come back and teach us all." "Promise?" Samuel asked Mary directly, with the solemn intensity only small children could manage. "Promise," Mary said, kissing his forehead, then making her rounds. Thomas, who suffered through the embrace with teenage stoicism. Sarah, who sobbed openly. Mrs. Thornton, who pressed an envelope into her hands with instructions not to open it until she reached Boston. Daniel, who held her like he might never let go. Finally, Mary turned to Hannah. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about always getting back up." As the train pulled away with Mary waving from the window, Hannah felt Daniel's arm around her shoulders. Thomas and Sarah pressed close on either side, Samuel heavy in her arms and Mrs. Thornton's weathered hand in hers. They stood together until the train disappeared into the distance, a family temporarily diminished but not broken. The ride home was quiet, each lost in their thoughts. But as they approached the farm, Hannah saw something that made her gasp. A crowd had gathered in their yard, residents from the Hannah house neighbors, townspeople, even some who'd never been particularly friendly before. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, perking up despite her sadness. Reverend Carlton stepped forward. "We wanted to mark this day," he said simply. "Mary leaving for college is a triumph for this whole community. A girl who lost her mother, who could have been limited by circumstances, is instead going to one of the finest women's colleges in the country. That's worth celebrating. Tables had been set up with food, musicians had brought instruments, and despite the morning's sorrow, a festival atmosphere emerged. It was Hannah realized the town's way of acknowledging how far they'd all come from the darkness of her whipping to this moment of collective pride in one of their own. "This is for Mary, but it's also for you," Mrs. Patterson said, pulling Hannah aside, "for showing us that investing in people, especially women, pays dividends we never imagined." As the afternoon wore on, Hannah found herself standing with Catherine from the Hannah house, watching the woman's children play with Samuel. Catherine had been with them 6 months now, and was preparing to leave, having saved enough from her seamstress work to rent a small place in town. "I'm scared," Catherine admitted. "What if I can't make it on my own?" "Then you come back," Hannah said simply. "The house will always be here, but Catherine, you're ready. I've watched you grow stronger every day. You've reclaimed yourself." "The way you did?" Hannah considered this. "No, your journey is your own, but if my experience taught me anything, it's that we're never as alone as we think we are. Look around this community that once stood silent while I was brutalized, now celebrates our triumphs. People can change. Hearts can open. Life can surprise us with its capacity for redemption." That evening, after the crowd had dispersed and the family had settled into their new configuration without Mary, Mrs. Thornton made an announcement that stunned them all. "I'm dying," she said matter-of-factly over dinner, causing Thomas to choke on his bread and Sarah to drop her fork. "Aunt Adelaide," Daniel began. "Oh, not immediately," she clarified with her characteristic briskness. "Doc Brennan says I have perhaps 6 months? Maybe a year if I'm fortunate. My heart is wearing out, which frankly is ironic, since I didn't know I had one until I met all of you." The silence was deafening. Samuel, too young to understand death, but sensing distress, began to cry. "None of that," Mrs. Thornton said firmly. "I'm 76 years old. I've lived a full life, most of it alone and bitter. These last years with you have been worth the previous 70. I'm not afraid, and I don't want you to be either." "There must be something," Hannah started. "There's nothing, and that's as it should be. What there is time. Time to say everything that needs saying to finish what needs finishing." She looked around the table at each of them. "I want to see the Hannah House officially incorporated as a permanent institution. I want to see Thomas graduate from high school. I want to see Sarah's stories published in the state paper. I want to teach Samuel to read. And I want to know that this family will continue to thrive when I'm gone." "We don't want you to go," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "My dear girl, nobody gets to stay forever. The blessing is in having something worth leaving people who will miss you. I spent most of my life without that. You've given me the gift of being mourned, of mattering. That's no small thing." Over the following weeks, they adjusted to this new reality. Mrs. Thornton, true to her word, threw herself into her remaining goals with remarkable energy. She worked with lawyers to establish the Hannah House as a permanent charitable trust. She tutored Samuel with patient determination, delighting when he recognized his first words. She edited Sarah's stories with ruthless kindness, making them better while maintaining Sarah's unique voice. But it was her time with Hannah that became most precious. They would sit together in the evenings, while Hannah sewed, talking about everything and nothing. "I need you to promise me something," Mrs. Thornton said one evening as the first snow of winter began to fall. "Anything," Hannah replied without hesitation. "Don't let my death diminish your joy. I've watched you rebuild yourself from nothing, create this beautiful family, inspire a community to be better. Don't let grief undo that work." "How can I not grieve?" "You gave me my inheritance, but more than that, you gave me my history. Through you, I connected to my mother, to a past I never knew I had. Then honor that by living fully. By raising Samuel to be as good a man as Thomas is becoming. By helping Sarah find her voice in a world that often silences women. By continuing to love Daniel with the same fierce tenderness you show every day. By keeping the Hannah House open for women who need what you needed." Hannah set down her sewing and took Mrs. Thornton's increasingly fragile hands. "You saved us as much as we saved you." "Perhaps," Mrs. Thornton agreed. "That's how the best families work, everyone saving everyone else over and over again. Christmas came with Mary home from college, full of stories about Boston, her studies, the other young women who'd become her friends. She'd bloomed in the months away, carrying herself with new confidence while remaining the gentle soul they'd sent off on the train. The other girls couldn't believe my story, she said, helping Hannah prepare Christmas dinner. A stepmother who was whipped for barrenness, who then had a baby who started a refuge for abused women. They think I'm making it up. It does sound fantastical, Hannah admitted. It sounds like a triumph, Mary corrected. Professor Williams wants to meet you. She's writing a book about women's resilience in frontier communities. They celebrated Christmas with typical Reed chaos, Samuel tearing through gifts, Sarah performing a play she'd written, Thomas pretending to be too mature for festivities while secretly delighting in them. Mrs. Thornton presided from her chair by the fire, frailer than ever, but with eyes still bright with love and intelligence. This is my last Christmas, she announced when they'd all gathered around her, and I can't imagine a better one. Don't say that, Sarah pleaded. Why not? It's true, and truth should never be feared. She looked at each of them in turn. You've given me something I never thought I'd have a reason to be grateful for every single moment that brought me here, even the painful ones. Without my sister's estrangement, I'd never have searched for Hannah. Without Hannah's suffering, she'd never have come to this family. Without this family's loss of Elizabeth, there would have been no room for Hannah. See how beautifully it all connects. That night, as snow fell softly outside, Hannah found herself in Samuel's room watching him sleep. At 3, he was a perfect blend of her and Daniel, her coloring, his steady temperament, both of their determination. The miracle child who'd proven her fertility, but more importantly had proven that love could overcome any curse. Daniel joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. What are you thinking? About circles, Hannah said softly. How Mrs. Thornton is ending her journey just as Samuel is beginning his. How Mary is becoming the educated woman Elizabeth always wanted her to be. How Thomas is almost the age you were when you went to war. Everything circles back but moves forward too. Speaking of moving forward, Daniel said, turning her to face him. I've been thinking about the future. When Mrs. Thornton, after she's gone, I mean. The money she's leaving will secure the children's education, the Hannah house, everything. But what do you want, Hannah? For yourself. Hannah considered this. I want to see our children grown and happy. I want the Hannah house to outlive us all. I want to grow old with you on this farm, watching grandchildren play where our children played. I want exactly what we have, just more of it for as long as we're given. No grand adventures, no trips to Chicago or Boston. Every day with this family is a grand adventure, Hannah replied. I've had enough drama for one lifetime. Now I want peace, love, ordinary miracles. Winter deepened, and with it Mrs. Thornton's decline accelerated. By February, she was confined to bed, though her mind remained sharp. The family took turns sitting with her, reading, talking, or simply being present. It was during one of Hannah's shifts that Mrs. Thornton made a confession that shocked her. I lied to you, she said weakly. Hannah's heart skipped. About what? Not a harmful lie, but a lie nonetheless. Your mother, my sister, she did write to me, many times. I have a box of letters I never answered because I was too proud, too hurt, that she'd chosen love over family position. Where are these letters? In my trunk. I brought them with me, could never bear to throw them away. I want you to have them now. Know your mother through her own words, not just my memories. Hannah retrieved the box with trembling hands. Dozens of letters yellowed with age, her mother's handwriting achingly familiar even after all these years. Read them when I'm gone, Mrs. Thornton said. They'll be like having her back for a little while. Why didn't you answer her, Say? Pride, stupidity, fear that father would find out. By the time he died and I was free to reach out, she was gone, and I thought it was too late. Then I found you and realized it's never too late for love to circle back. On the last day of February, with the whole family gathered around her bed, Mrs. Thornton spoke her final words. Hannah, she said, her voice barely a whisper, you asked me once if I thought your mother would be proud. She is. I know because I am, and we were always so alike. Live, my dear one. Live beautifully. She passed quietly as the sun set her hand in Hannah's, surrounded by the family she'd chosen and who'd chosen her in return. The funeral drew an enormous crowd. It seemed the entire county wanted to pay respects to the Chicago lady who'd become one of their own. But it was Sarah's eulogy that captured Mrs. Thornton's essence best. She taught me that being a lady wasn't about white gloves and proper grammar, Sarah said, her young voice carrying clearly through the church. It was about backbone and kindness in equal measure. She showed us that family isn't about blood or law, but about showing up, staying put, and loving through the hard parts. She was our grandmother in every way that mattered, and we were her family in the only way she needed. The weeks following Mrs. Thornton's death were difficult, the house feeling too large without her commanding presence. But slowly, life reasserted itself. Spring came early that year, and with it new challenges and joys. Thomas received his acceptance to agricultural college, his pride evident despite his attempts at nonchalance. Sarah's story about Mrs. Thornton was published in the state's largest newspaper, bringing her offers to write more. Samuel, now 4, had indeed learned to read simple words, fulfilling Mrs. Thornton's final goal. The Hannah House thrived, now housing 5 women and 8 children. With the financial stability Mrs. Thornton's bequest provided, they were able to hire a full-time teacher for the children and a nurse for medical needs. One day in April, as Hannah worked in the shop, now expanded to include 2 seamstresses she'd trained, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. For a moment, her heart stopped thinking it was Morrison's ghost. But it was Jack Crawford, hat in hand, looking decades older than his years. "Mrs. Reed," he said formally. "Might I have a word?" Hannah nodded, though she kept her hand near the scissors on her desk. "I've come to apologize." Crawford said the words clearly difficult. "For everything. For standing by while Morrison hurt you. For the things I said. For being a coward when you needed defenders." "Why now?" Hannah asked. "My daughter," Crawford said simply. "She's 15 now, and some boy's been pressuring her, calling her worthless because she has morals. It made me think about what kind of world I've helped create, what kind of man I've been. I want to be better for her." Hannah studied him for a long moment. "Apologies are words, Mr. Crawford. What are your actions?" "I want to donate to the Hannah House, and I want to speak publicly about what I witnessed, what I participated in through my silence. Maybe if other men hear it from someone who was part of the problem, they'll think twice before becoming the same." It was a start, Hannah thought. Not redemption, but a beginning. That evening, she told Daniel about Crawford's visit. They were sitting on the porch, watching Samuel chase fireflies, while Sarah helped him, their laughter bright in the gathering dusk. "Do you believe him?" Daniel asked. "I believe he wants to change. Whether he can sustain it remains to be seen." She paused. "Mrs. Thornton would say to give him the chance. That transformation is always possible until our last breath." "You've transformed an entire town," Daniel pointed out. "Person by person, heart by heart." "We transformed together," Hannah corrected. "All of us. Even Morrison, in his twisted way, was part of it. Without his cruelty, would the town have ever confronted its own capacity for evil? Would they have chosen to be better? I'd rather you hadn't suffered for their education. So would I. But since I did, at least something good came from it." As summer arrived with its familiar rhythms of planting and tending, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. The joy was tinged with worry. She was older now, the pregnancy harder on her body. But Doc Brennan was optimistic. "You're strong as an ox, Hannah Reed, but," he said after an examination, "this baby will be fine, and so will you." The family's reaction was pure delight. Samuel was fascinated by the idea of being a big brother, constantly talking to Hannah's belly and offering to share his toys. Sarah immediately began writing stories for the baby, while Thomas, home from his first year of college, built a new cradle with intricate carved details. Even Mary, back for summer break, threw herself into preparations. But it was Daniel's response that touched Hannah most deeply. He treated her like spun glass, fetching and carrying, refusing to let her lift anything heavier than a teacup. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she protested one day when he insisted on carrying her market basket. "Let me fuss," he replied. "I didn't get to with Samuel. Everything was too chaotic, too uncertain. Let me enjoy this pregnancy with you, knowing our family is secure, our future bright." The summer was marked by abundance crops, thriving, the shop busier than ever, the Hannah House helping its 10th family find safety and renewal. The town had fully embraced the institution with regular fundraisers and volunteer rotations. One evening, as Hannah sat with several residents teaching them embroidery, Catherine returned for a visit. She'd married a kind widower with 2 children, creating the family she'd thought she'd never have. "I wanted you to see," she told Hannah privately, "that your example works, that broken women can heal and love again." "You healed yourself," Hannah reminded her. "I just provided a safe place to do it." "That's everything," Catherine insisted. "That safe place is everything." As Hannah's pregnancy progressed into autumn, she found herself reading her mother's letters that Mrs. Thornton had left her. They painted a picture of a woman much like Hannah herself, strong, determined, choosing love, despite its costs. One letter, written shortly after Hannah's birth, particularly moved her. "My dearest Adelaide," her mother had written, "I know Father has forbidden you to contact me, but I pray someday you'll read this. I've had a daughter, Hannah Grace. She's perfect, with eyes that see everything and a grip that suggests she'll never let go of anything she loves. I want her to know, her aunt to understand, she comes from strong women who make difficult choices. Perhaps someday, when Father's anger has cooled, you can meet her. Until then, know that I love you. That choosing James didn't mean not choosing family. It meant expanding my definition of what family could be." Hannah cried over that letter, wishing her mother could see how prophetic her words had been. Hannah had indeed expanded the definition of family, creating something beautiful from the ashes of traditional expectations. Her second child with Daniel, another boy, was born on a crisp October morning with far less drama than Samuel's arrival. The labor was swift, the baby healthy, and Hannah recovered quickly. "What shall we name him?" Daniel asked, cradling his newest son, while Samuel peered at his brother with fascination. Hannah thought of all the people who'd shaped their journey. "William," she said finally. "William Thornton Reed. For Mrs. Thornton, Adelaide's father was William, and for the will to survive, to thrive, to transform pain into purpose." "William," Daniel repeated, testing it. "Will Reed, I like it." The christening was held on a beautiful Sunday, the church packed with well-wishers, as Reverend Carlton blessed the baby. Hannah looked around at their assembled family. Thomas, tall and strong, home from college. Mary, graceful and learned, preparing for her final year. Sarah, 15 now, and beautiful in her intensity, her writer's eyes taking in every detail. Samuel, 4 years old and vibrating with pride at being a big brother. Daniel, her rock, her salvation, her partner in every sense. She thought of those who were absent: Elizabeth, whose death had created space for Hannah's life; Mrs. Thornton, whose search for family had enriched them all; even Morrison, whose cruelty had inadvertently led to this abundance of love. "You look contemplative," Daniel whispered as they walked home, William sleeping in his arms while Samuel rode on Thomas's shoulders. "I'm thinking about testimonies," Hannah replied. "How every scar on my back is a testimony to survival. How every child we raise is a testimony to love's triumph. How the Hannah house is a testimony to redemption. How our whole life is a testimony that cruelty doesn't get the last word." That evening, as the family gathered for Sunday dinner, loud, chaotic, perfect, Hannah stood to make a toast. "To Mrs. Thornton," she began, raising her glass of cider, "who showed us that it's never too late to find family. To Elizabeth, who built the foundation we stand on. To my mother, who chose love over safety and taught me courage before I was old enough to understand it. To Hannah," Daniel interrupted, standing beside her, "who showed us all that broken doesn't mean worthless, that barren doesn't mean empty, that chosen families are as real as any other kind. To all of us," Sarah added, never one to be left out of a speech, for choosing each other again and again every single day. They drank, they laughed, they held baby William when he fussed and played with Samuel when he demanded attention. They were in every way that mattered a complete family, not despite their unconventional formation, but because of it. As the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold that reminded Hannah of wheat ready for harvest, she stood on the porch where so much of their story had unfolded. The same porch where Daniel had first brought her broken and bleeding, where they'd been married, where Mrs. Thornton had spent her last summer, where their children had taken first steps and spoken first words. Daniel joined her as she'd known he would, wrapping his arms around her from behind, careful of William sleeping against her chest. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing his question from years before. "How could I regret any of it?" Hannah replied. "Every moment, even the painful ones, led us here. Morrison's cruelty revealed your kindness. My barrenness led to Samuel and William. Mrs. Thornton's loneliness brought her to our door. It's all connected, all necessary." "You sound like Mrs. Thornton," Daniel observed. "There are worse things to sound like," Hannah said, smiling. "She was right about so much, especially about love being a choice we make daily." "Then I choose you," Daniel said simply. "Today, tomorrow, always. And I choose you. Choose this family. Choose this life we've built from nothing but determination and love." Inside, she could hear Sarah reading to Samuel, her voice dramatic and engaging. Thomas and Mary were debating something about agricultural methods, their voices carrying the passionate certainty of youth. William stirred in her arms, making the small sounds that would soon become demands for milk. "We should go in," Hannah said, though she didn't move. "In a moment," Daniel replied. "Let's just stand here a bit longer looking at what we've made." So they stood, the woman once whipped for barrenness, now holding her second miracle child, the man who'd rescued her. Now, her partner in all things, both of them gray-touched and weather-worn, but standing strong. The Hannah house lights were visible in the distance, sheltering another woman who'd fled cruelty, offering her the same chance Hannah had been given. The cycle of redemption continuing, the testimony of transformation being written in new lives, new chances, new choices to love instead of hate. "You know what I think," Hannah said as they finally turned to go inside. "What's that?" "I think Mrs. Thornton was right. It's never too late for love to circle back. We're proof of that. Our whole life is proof of that." "Then let's keep proving it," Daniel said, opening the door to their home, their family, their beautifully imperfect life. As they entered the warm kitchen where their children waited, Hannah felt the truth of her survival settle into her bones, not just that she'd survived, but that she'd thrived. The 100 lashes had been meant to break her. Instead, they'd broken her open, creating space for all this love to flood in. Morrison was dead, his hatred buried with him. Mrs. Thornton was gone, but her legacy lived on in every woman the Hannah house saved. Elizabeth's children had grown strong and kind, proof that love transcends death. And Hannah herself, once barren, now mother to 4, once worthless, now invaluable, once alone, now surrounded by family, stood as living testimony that sometimes the greatest revenges aren't violent, but beautiful. That the best response to cruelty is to build something so lovely, so lasting, that the cruelty becomes nothing more than a footnote in a larger story of triumph. "Mama," Samuel called, running to her with a book. "Read to me." "Of course, my love," Hannah said, settling into her chair by the fire, Samuel on one side, Sarah on the other, Mary and Thomas nearby. Daniel holding William, all of them together in the home they'd built from ashes and hope. This was her revenge, her vindication, her happily ever after. Not a fairy tale ending, but something better. A real life, complicated and difficult, but also beautiful beyond measure, chosen daily, treasured completely, and shared with people who'd started as strangers but became everything. The whip scars on her back had faded to nearly nothing. The love in her heart had grown to encompass the world. And Hannah Price Reed, the woman who'd almost died by the river, lived on fully fiercely and surrounded by the family she'd thought she'd never have.